Welcome to Lost of the Nails, episode 6. And this episode is entitled, This is Definitely Not Adeptus Titanicus. We are finally doing it. This is About Time is the subtitle for this. We have all of our super friends in one place, except for Austin, because he has a job and can't do this. So, Eric, who is our guest?
Shit, I don't know.
Yeah, I was like, man, I want to introduce Eric, but it's a real dick move to have him introduce my friend who's literally about 1 minute away from my classroom where I'm recording because of a mic situation. So, Josh.
I was going to ride my bike down to your office.
I know. So, Josh, welcome. You were never on Splintermine, were you?
I was on your one guest episode.
Oh, that's right.
Like the big panel towards the end.
Yeah, which is funny because especially during the pandemic, 90% of the time, if I was like, so I finally snuck a game in, it was me playing against you because we used to live a lot closer.
Right, yep.
We're up there. So if you recognize the tones, you can't see the glorious beard, and I assure you it is phenomenal. You might recognize his voice from, you were on the independent characters quite a bit, and you were kind of like, not officially, you were kind of the unofficial like specialist games guy, correct?
Yeah, I would say I was probably on maybe 20 episodes of the ICs over the years. And towards the end, definitely got dubbed the title of Specialist Games Josh, just because that definitely became my jam of Necromunda, Adeptus Titanicus, Kill Team, any kind of skirmish level game is kind of my sweet spot these days.
Yeah.
So a man of taste.
A man of taste. Yeah. And sophistication.
Refined.
And a hell of a beard. Well, on top of that too, like I know if I'm playing a new game, you're pretty much my go-to guy because you have a good way of like looking at a game and sort of looking at it as far as system. And so for that, I mean, you're going to be a great resource for this on top of just being a guy that just absolutely loves this game. And I'm telling you right now, I knew both you and Austin have been trying to get me into this game since 2018. And you were both saying, no, this game is absolutely your jam. And I knew you were 100% right. And then when I finally broke down and played it, I was like, I'm in.
What are you waiting for?
Well, this episode has been kicked down the road quite a bit. And thank God we're not going to make this a running gag that next episode we're going to do that. It's not going to be like the sign in one of those really cheap dives that says free beer tomorrow, and it just never comes to fruition. Our news that I have in our notes, I wrote these notes back in January. and these notes are, they're old news. So I'm just going to say thick chicken is thick. This is a Titanicus release. Can you guys explain to me what that model was or is or will be? It hasn't been released yet.
So that's the new Direwolf, which is sort of a heavyish scout titan. Basically there's a whole genre of titans that are essentially, what if we glue a larger class of titans gun to the top?
Yes.
And this is the Warhound version of that. So it's essentially a heavy Warhound with a big laser on the top. It's up armored, it's thick. I love it. To me it looks like an ambush predator. It's the type of thing that's hunkered down in some burning building, powered off, and then someone walks by and it just yells, "Surprise, motherfucker!" That is. I love it. I recognize that the reaction in the community is somewhat divided, but I absolutely adore it.
Josh, what's your take on thick chicken?
Yeah, I'm here for it. The legs are not my favorite because the legs are still kind of spindly. I don't just love the style of it, but overall I think it's a sweet Titan and should be a fun addition to the game. My big hope for it is that they add one extra point of reactor to it because Warhounds like to get hot real quick.
Yeah, because otherwise she's running hot.
Yeah, we're going to be getting into that later. And from what few games I've played of this, I like running it hot. So Thick Chicken did two things for me. One, I've never had a model that I look at and say, absolutely fucking not. And then 15 minutes later say, I'm getting at least two of them when they release. Because after I finish my Furions stuff, I wanted to do like a more conventional collection first. I'm definitely going to lean into the Ember Wolves, and those things are going to obviously work well with Ember Wolves, and they're all Warhound trip. But the other thing was, within 15 minutes, I was like, it's so fucking ugly that it kind of goes full circle and becomes awesome all over again. And there was, is it Battle Bling that did like a conversion kit for something like that? There was one of the companies that made one, and it looks like they
Grimdark has come out with it.
Grimdark, there you go. We'll get into that when we get into resources. But yeah, I've looked at a couple of painted ones, and I'm like, I don't know. It's like you put a fat Reaver head on top of a thing and a laser, and I'm kind of here for thick chicken. Like, I've never gone from just no fucking way to I'm definitely taking 2, and that's fucking amazing. And the community reaction to it, like looking at like Facebook, like the AT18 Facebook group reaction to it, I was like, I am definitely in the right place. Because some people are like, that doesn't look good. And other people are like, it's so fucking stupid that it's amazing. And I'm like, you're right. And I'm
These
home.
are my people.
These are my people.
Yeah. I think the stock kit as is going to be pretty sweet. I'm just going to be a little bit more dynamic with the leg posing. I don't need to swap legs out, but just cut them up a bit and pose them around, and I think it'll be pretty sweet.
Yeah. Now this is a weird. Not since Splinter Mine have I been on an episode with a bunch of people that own or are interested, are pointy-eared curious. We recorded our last episode right before they did all of the model previews at I think at LVO. Wow, it's been a hot minute since we recorded. Eric, you have a different take now, correct?
Yeah. So Eric might have spoken too soon about the Eldari releases. I think the main sort of takeaway from last episode was this idea that the Eldari releases that they had shown were perfectly coherent with your Eldari range. So you could sort of add them as you wanted to. And as someone who has a fairly large Eldar collection, I don't feel the need to like go replace all my Rangers with new Rangers and,
right.
Put my Guardians in the trash. The new releases, the Corsairs are just like perfect and call to my soul and are beautiful. And I have never really liked the Avatar, and now I desperately need one. The Avatar model is gorgeous. I think it's that same thing. Like they still look right. There's nothing where I'm like, oh, you've entirely reimagined the Eldar, and now I need to, make a whole new army. But damn, that kit is cool.
Yep. Yeah, I'm hoping to pick one up just to restart yet another Eldar army. I've had 3 over the years, and that model might just get me to start that 4th.
Yeah, I think my favorite part of that one was seeing the rules preview go out, and I'm still for some reason I'm still part of the Death Guard Facebook group, and watching people complain that Mortarion doesn't stack up against the Avatar, and I'm like, Mortarion flies. He's a psyker. Okay, that's fine. Like, yes, if you let him walk up and split you in half, sure, you're going to have a problem. But I don't think you should burn your Death Guard anytime soon. So, yeah, and then also they got what was it, yesterday or 2 days ago? There was also the Aeronautica stuff for Eldar, correct?
Yeah, so they have previewed models for both whatever the actual plane name is for the Crimson Hunters and the Wraith Fighter are both now going to be in Aeronautica, which was really nice because the previous version of it had just been the Forge World Phoenix, not the Phoenix. Yeah, the Phoenix, the Nightwing Interceptor, and the big Vampire Hunter and Raider. Yeah. So it was all the Forge World models. And so there was this sort of conspicuous, like, but what about the fighter jets that exist in the main game?
Yeah.
And those are coming, and I'm super excited by that because Crimson Hunters are what got me playing Eldar. I was debating back when I was getting back into 40K. I was going to do a mobile infantry army, and I was deciding between Tau and Eldar. And then they previewed the Crimson Hunter, and I was like, I will take 2, and I'm playing Eldar, and I don't own the rules yet, and I don't care. And so seeing those in Aeronautica is exciting because little tiny planes are great fun to paint.
Yeah, and we'll definitely, Aeronautica is something that I'm going to pick up this summer once school gets out. Like, that's something that I'm just all over, especially with the starter box having Space Marine stuff, which I would just paint in like 30K, Sons of Horus colors and do the other Eldar stuff just as, little mini versions of my my 40K armies. So yeah, I actually ordered one of the Forge World vampires for Sky, along with he wanted a Hornet too, and I was getting a couple of parts for Titans and things like that. Put the order in on February 18th. If I'm not mistaken, we are on the 19th of March, and it still hasn't shipped. So the whole like you get it within 20 business days thing, not working, and they aren't things that are marked not in stock. So I'm a little annoyed at that. But what I'm not annoyed at, Kill Team Nachmund. I think all three of us ordered our copies from Herrick Games, correct?
Yes, I did.
Yep.
Yeah, there's a lot. So just as a guy I wanted the Corsair Kill Team just because, I'm taking a pointy-eared break, but not that big of a break. And I do love Kill Team. And then the other thing is just, I hope that everybody is disappointed that the second half is Chaos and that they want to sell those to me, because I need all of those troop units for my Black Legion stuff. I'm just having a blast making characters and just painting whatever the fuck I want until this summer comes. And by the time I get to summer comes and I actually have time to play a lot more, then I'm going to be all about the Black Legion. And the terrain that comes with it too is all super useful. So I am all about that box.
Yeah, it was a good box. I think my brother called dibs on my Chaos Space Marines, but yeah, it's a great box. It's the first Kill Team box that I've like really, really wanted. I bought the Sisters versus Hal one because I wasn't sure if that unit was ever going to come out in a separate box, and I wanted the little neophytes to run at things and have them die. But I'm excited for this box. I'm excited for the Corsairs. I think the terrain in it's cool, and yeah, I ordered mine from Sky. I think he was making fun of me because I ordered it like an hour after he put it up on the site.
Yeah, it was a lag. There's a bit of a lag there, so
that's still pretty quick.
It's still all right.
The models are sweet on that, Brian. You get my half of the chaos half of my box for sure.
You're damn right.
And yeah, the terrain doubles not only awesome for Kill Team, but also Necromunda, 40K, etc. Like it's such a versatile mix of terrain in that box that it makes it a really great value. It's hard to resist, especially if you have a pointy ear proclivity.
Yes. And Sky Shipment, I think, was a little bit late getting out to him from Games Workshop. But when he finally gets his copy, I'm going to drive to his house and do the unboxing video with him just to do it. So, and I'm going to make fun of him because he can't find his Herrick Games hat and I can find mine. So I'm going to wear it. So let's get into this thing. I just regret that I'm not playing this game right now. I love this game so fucking much. Our first segment here, we're going to look at what is Adeptus Titanicus 2018 edition. We'll just refer to it as AT18 here out. So what is this game, guys?
So one of my favorite, there's a quote that I'm going to paraphrase here because it's a longer quote that I couldn't find. But the summation is, what if the 1812 Overture was a miniatures game? It is the Horus Heresy as a setting. So it's set in 30K. This is primarily, at this point, I think a good thing because it helps sort of restrict the scope of the game. But it's, the classic Heresy, loyalists versus traitors. It's about enormous robots. It's at 8mm scale, so the models are detailed but manageable. And it's God's most perfect game.
Couldn't agree more. If you want a quick lore deep cut too, actually the reason that GW invented the Horus Heresy was the original Adeptus Mechanicus box had red minis and blue minis. They were all Titans identical, and they're like, okay, so because they could only afford molds for 2 different Titans at the time because molds are super expensive. So they essentially came up with a reason, which turned into the Horus Heresy, for why these 2 identical factions would be fighting each other. And here we are, like 30 years later, still in Horus Heresy, super relevant. But look how much has come out of that, just because molds were expensive at the time.
Right. Well, it was we have to figure out how to make these 2 things fight each other. Well, let's make up Civil War is always great because then you're going to have the same stuff. Okay, cool. There we go.
Yeah.
Now, this game, I mean, the original version of this one came out. So this is a thing. Like, I'm an old Hammer guy. Like, I played Epic back in the day. I've played 40K since. I mean, I remember the White Dwarf 127 coming out with Craftworld Eldar stuff for the first time. So that's right around, I would say, when I started. This is a game that I just never got roped into. So, Josh, I know you played it way back in the day. You and Austin, I think, I'm trying to remember if either of you or both of you were saying that this is what got you into 40K.
Yeah, it's this was kind of my gateway drug into the whole Warhammer world, was actually with Adeptus Titanicus, the original box. My brother went to Dundracon and picked it up at the flea market and brought it back, and we just built it up, and was pretty young at the time, but had just had a blast with it, and then really got into Epic because of that, which then led to Fantasy and 40K, and that's all she wrote.
Wow. Eric, did you play it back in the day with the older version? Or
I did not.
Oh, wow.
That sort of well predates my entry into this part of the hobby. At that time, I was still mostly a sort of a Hex and counter war gamer with my dad. So no, this AT-18 is my first exposure to it. Apparently, the first edition of Adeptus Titanicus was from 1988. I was 5 at the time, so definitely didn't play it when it was released. But this is, I think, a lot of people's sort of entryway into it, because it did come as a box set, and it was cool.
Given that, I mean, I think the reflexive answer is to say that this game is made for nostalgic old timers, which I'm not saying that nostalgic old timers don't like it. I think that's a little too easy of an answer. I mean, who is this, in your guys' opinion, and I'll start with you, Josh, who is this game marketed to? And what is your evidence for that?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's try to find a good way to word that. I think the game is definitely designed towards people who enjoy large, stompy robots. It's an interesting mix of game design, which we can get into either now or a little bit later. If you, I know there's a note on that a bit.
Yeah, we'll do
down
that
the road.
Yeah, we'll do it in the gameplay segment, which is coming up right after this.
Yeah, it's okay. The concise answer here. It's for hobbyists first and foremost, hobbyists. People who like a little bit more crunch in their game, but then also somebody who enjoys a skirmish level engagement. So fewer models, more depth in rules, story, strategy, etc. And I guess the evidence for that would be just that on the hobby side, there's so much opportunity for ways you can take these models. Gameplay wise, it's more narrative in nature. Even if you're playing a match play, just pick up game, there's just more story innately built into the game for the engagements. The fact that it is Horus Heresy and you are playing kind of a Civil War engagement, like there's more natural narrative, I feel like, lends itself to gameplay. There's a lot of cinematic moments. Just skirmish level means things really matter. Like your positioning really matters. How something plays out matters. Losing one model can make a big difference. I don't know. I'm having a hard time formulating this coherently, but it's just a great game. It's for everybody.
It's for everybody. Eric, what would your answer to that be? I mean, who is it made for, and what supports that?
So I think one thing that got touched on is I think it's a hobbyist's game.
Yeah.
And I think that's largely because the way they have approached doing the miniatures for AT-18 is really spectacular. They have captured a huge amount of detail that is on larger Titans, is on the 28mm Titans, but it's little itty bitty. And because it's a skirmish game, and because you can viably get away with, 4 models as your army, you can just lavish attention on those models. I've really enjoyed it because I'm someone who, I don't batch paint. I hate batch painting. It is the easiest way to just suck the soul out of my hobby and get me to stop painting, is to be like, paint 15 pairs of boots. For this, sit down and paint a Titan, and go hog wild with heraldry, do weird things on the kneecaps, and be like, checkers on this one and a little griffin symbol on this one. it has that sort of deep hobby aspect to it. I will say it is a somewhat crunchier game, so it's definitely targeted for folks who do want some thought is a sort of a pejorative way to put this, but who do want to think about aspects of the game. Don't just want to, like, there are games and there are days when I just want to roll dice and like make little explosion noises. This is not really that game.
Yeah.
I think early on, and this is, I think, because the Grandmaster's box set was sort of poorly targeted. It had a definitive feel of, this is for Horus Heresy players who have more money than sense. I bought one. That is me. I think over time this has somewhat evolved, and I think that's actually done the game a little bit of a disservice, because I actually think it's one of GW's more accessible games right now.
Yeah.
So I think it has sort of shifted over time from, this game isn't necessarily for you and that's okay, to like, no, seriously, play Titanicus.
So a couple things on that. Yes, when the Grandmaster Edition first came out, I remember looking at that, and that was when people are saying, "Oh, you got to look at this. You're going to love this game. It's great. You're going to like it." And then I looked at it, and I'm like, "That's my barrier to entry. That's a lot, and that's going to be a no from me." Because I was looking at it too, and I was like, I understand games where there are activations, and I was like,
there's not a whole lot of activations in this like $300 starter set.
Yeah, so you're asking me to drop $300. I get 2 Warlords and some Imperial Knights. I mean, there was terrain. It's not that it's a bad deal. Like, if I were to find one on the shelf today, now that I play, I would go grab it. But as far as, hey, this is a new game, kids, like, first one's not free. First one's $300 fucking dollars. And I was like, yeah, that's going to be a no from me, dog. I'm going to back off on that one. So
it was incredibly expensive and a good deal at the same time, but definitely not necessarily the best way to introduce a hobby community that likes to complain about prices in the first place to a new game.
Yeah.
Or a hobby where, I mean, if you think about how many times, you hear this is like, someone got this box for me for Christmas because I was a nerd and grandma thought I'd like toy soldiers. Like, you're not going to get a $300 starter set for this game. That's not what's waiting under the Christmas tree.
Yeah.
And I think that hurt it. And then I think it was like a year before they came out. It was, I think, the next holiday, because sometimes GW does the sort of holiday bargain boxes.
Sure.
That are there. Our stuff never goes on sale, but it sometimes goes on sale in packaged things. That they came out with what is now sort of the Adeptus Titanicus starter set.
Yeah.
And that just entirely changed who this game was for, because it was suddenly like, oh, just buy this and be done.
Yeah.
Yep. They had the Titan Battle Group for a while, which was actually a really good deal. If I'm remembering correctly, that was a Warlord, a Reaver, and 2 Warhounds in the box for, it was like $140 or something like that. You had to buy the rules separately, but just from a model, like start collecting on the model standpoint, it was an Axiom Maniple, which we'll get into more. And you can pick up the rules with all the templates, dice, and all that for $50 on top of that. So like all in, fully ready to play for under $200 was amazing. And I was sad to see that box go away. But the new starter boxes are awesome too.
Yeah. Yeah. So the thing that I would definitely echo on this is, this game is very much made for hobbyists. As you guys were mentioning, that's the thing that even when the game first came out, I remember looking at videos and pictures of the sprues, even of Knights. And I'm like, you aren't losing detail from the 28 millimeter down to an Imperial, you're looking at a Crusader on a 40 millimeter base, and the detail, there is no detail lost. It's absolutely amazing. But when you get into it, I mean, the scale of the thing going from 6 millimeter to 8 millimeter made a huge difference in the amount of detail that you can put on things. And plus they're all, they're in plastic and everything, but the Reaver, as I understand it, was designed in CAD. And, so it's definitely a hobbyist thing. And the low model count, you can have a Corsair Maniple, right, with 5 Reavers. Well, it's a great kit and one that I would paint 5 times and have 0 problems with. And you can put as much effort into it or not into it. The detail can sell it if you're not putting as much into it. So definitely agreed on the hobbyist thing. The thing where I would point back to it being a game, I don't know that it's aimed at specifically at older players, because older players would be a little more nostalgic, but where I think older players, especially ones that are a little intimidated by 40K or don't want to keep up with all of the crunch and updates and those things, is that this is that thing, Eric, that you always talk about with static systems, that it isn't static because they're ignoring it. It's just you aren't getting points jerks all over the place. Like the points for your weapons are on the actual cards themselves that you use as a reference, so they aren't quarterly, they aren't adjusting the points on all these different things. And I think that's really appealing for, older players tend to have more responsibility and a little bit less time. And so the game is a nice, perfect mixture of rules that aren't constantly changing, but enough stuff's being introduced to keep it fresh. A system with enough tactical crunch, but then also, there's enough random in there, but not like Battlefleet Gothic where you're rolling dice to see if you need to roll more dice to see if any of those dice might do something. Like there's enough random in there, but then just when we get into gameplay, the risk reward thing is what sucked me in, because I have a type. And this game is that type, as Josh well knows.
And I think you're right, Brian. I think that the somewhat slower pace of development, because the game feels supported.
Yes.
You go a while between things, but like there's now a bunch of supplements, and they've updated some of those supplements and compiled them. New stuff comes out. Some of it's great, some of it's not great, but all of it's, it definitely feels supported, but it's at a much slower pace. And I think because of the limited scope, you don't get that sort of 40K feel of, I really want to start this, but maybe I'm going to wait for the first balanced data sheet to make sure that I didn't glue the wrong weapon on things. Like a Reaver Titan with a Chain Fist and a Melta Cannon is never not going to have a place in Titanicus. And so that's, I think, the thing. And it's not just, I think that's true for both older gamers, because, jobs and kids and things like that.
Sure.
But I think it's also nice for that hobbyist aspect.
Yeah.
That you're not like, okay, but I put all of this time into this model and now it just sits on a shelf.
Right.
There's very rarely does that happen. And generally when it does, you sort of know headed into it that you're painting something particularly niche and maybe it won't come up.
Yeah.
So I think that really helps a lot.
So, oh man, let's go into the gameplay. God damn it, I love this game. Just as I'm reading all this stuff, I'm like, why am I sitting in my classroom talking about this game? And I'm like, because I get to paint this game while I'm editing this episode. So this is a nice little positive feedback loop for me. So for this part of it, we want to just look at the gameplay itself, which is, we can't go super in depth on this stuff, but we can look at the basics and the mechanics and why it works. We put in the notes first. It felt weird. Like my instinct was to go back and move this somewhere, but I think that picking what faction you're doing plays into that whole hobby element of it, and I think is really important. So how do you guys, what are the choices as far as picking these things?
So at its core, you've got sort of 4, which is really 3-ish faction choices. And it's the classic sort of Horus Heresy loyalists, traitors, Black Shields, who are essentially people who tried to split the middle. And then they also have custom Legion rules if you just want to make your own Legion. One of the things they do say is like the Horus Heresy is this hugely expansive, catastrophic setting. So just because a Titan Legion has disappeared in 40K doesn't mean it can't exist in 30K, because that's what made it disappear. And so you can just go, I'm going to make my own custom Legion to have their own custom fluff. And importantly, and this is a really handy thing for event organizers, this was also a civil war.
Mm-hmm.
So you can play a traitor faction of what is thought of as a loyalist legion.
Mm-hmm.
And, somewhere along the line, they get wiped out. The same thing is true for the traitors. There's whole night houses and legions that just split down the middle. And so there is some flexibility there. But that's sort of the core, is like, do you want to be loyalist? Do you want to be traitor? Or do you want to sort of choose your own adventure? And that's the big choice. And you're not really that restricted once you do that, because everybody's using the same units. It is they, this time they did it on purpose, but they get to use the same sprues.
Yeah.
The one difference is loyalists get the Ordo Sinister, who's the Psi Titan guys, and the traitors get corrupted Titans for late war, my Titan is growing tentacles shenanigans. But that's the only difference.
Which is a hobbyist wet dream of being able to model those corrupted Titans. And I can't wait for Brian to take a stab at this.
Oh my God, I know. I really am just trying to paint my Furians just straight. This is the first ones. I'm doing them I'm going stock. I'm not thinking of the scheme. But then every time I see a post where somebody has done like corrupted Nurgle ones, and the Death Guard parts just work so well, even at this scale. And I'm just like, oh, yeah.
Flesh chimneys in all of your systems.
Yes, flesh chimneys for everyone. Which remind me to thank everybody for Mortarion when we get towards the end here. So,
and I think the real sort of question with how to pick your Legio, because you occasionally see this on the Facebook groups where someone will be like, well, what's the best Legion to play? Mm-hmm. And it's usually responded to with that sort of meme from Black Panther, we don't do that here. Like, what do you want to play? Whose fluff is cool? And what color scheme do you want to paint?
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's the determining factor. There's a really narrow the guys at Maximal Fire did a sort of rating of the Loyalist legions, and they're working on the traitor ones. Mm-hmm. And they sort of rank them, but one of their notes is that the difference between the quote-unquote best and the quote-unquote worst legions for Titanicus is really narrow. You're not talking about, okay, I'm playing Space Marines, should I play, Black Templars or Imperial Fists, and have those be entirely different ways of playing the game, entirely different rankings, things like that. It's really just sort of flavors. Do you want the Loyalists have sort of better command and control? The traitors tend to be slightly spikier and slashier, but like you can play a Loyalist Legion that gets up in the middle of things and starts hacking away, and you can play a just stand back and nuke them from orbit Traitor Legion. There's a lot of viability there. So really, it is for choosing your Legio is just what do you want to play? Play that.
Yep. Paint scheme, a little bit of flavor, just a little bit of seasoning, using the same models. Same mana pools are available to both Traitors and Loyalists. So you are using the same models minus the Sinister Titan that you mentioned. So it really is, it's paint scheme that you like, the lore that you like that backs that up. Maybe the rule sways you, but the rule differences are pretty minimum.
Yeah, and from what little experience I have with the game, so they're all using the same mana pools, and there are some legions that their trade is going to work better with particular mana pools than others, but there aren't that many that I've seen, and I don't have a lot of playing experience to back this up, but just a guy who looks at rules and could sort of play that out. It doesn't look like there's a ton of these that just make absolutely zero sense or make things not work completely. Like, you kind of have to go out of your way to find them, and if it's a matter of you wanting to use those combinations of models, like maybe you have to switch one out, but there's another mana pool that's close enough to it as far as composition that you can totally make it work. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, that if you're getting into this game, I don't think you should be intimidated by all of the different mana pools or doing those things. I think start out with the models you want to paint and then read through them, and you're going to have a couple of options that maybe you have to switch out one, a Reaver for, or a couple of, Warhound for something or whatever it is. But you're going to be able to find stuff that works, and once you start playing what they do actually makes sense, if that makes sense.
There are a few Legios that let you swap out certain types of Titans for other Titans. Like, they have a preferred style of Titan, so you can take a same type of mana pool as somebody else, but it'll allow you to get a bonus Warlord and drop a Reaver for that or something like that. So if you have a preference towards a particular chastity of Titan, then there are some options that might appeal to you because of that. But it's hard to make a wrong choice.
Yeah. Well, before we I don't want to get stuck on this, but I think it's just important to kind of point out, or just have us note really quick before we go into the basic rules. Eric, I'll start with you. What do you play, and why did you choose it? Like, what's the kind of quick?
So I play Legio of Storm, which is the Warp Runners. My path for this was my favorite color is blue, and I actually don't have a blue army yet, and so Legio Storm is blue.
Yeah.
And I happen to have a paint that I really liked. Vallejo Mecha Deep Blue is just perfect.
Oh.
I like Loyalists. I confess I have a really hard time playing Traitor armies in the Horus Heresy. So I really like Loyalist chapters, and I just liked the idea of Legio Storm. You know, canonically, this isn't reflected in the rules, but canonically, they have teleporters for their Titans. They just beam down and go to war. And that seemed sort of beautiful and arrogant and ridiculous. And so I was like, yep, I'm sold. I do like their rules. Their rules have a nice sort of reliability component to them where they're slightly faster early on, and they have some important rerolls. Rerolls are really hard to get in Titanicus.
Yeah.
Unlike in, say, 40K. And they have some nice rerolls that make reactor management a little bit easier. So I just liked this sort of elegant, arrogant, not particularly weathered because we don't like come down on drop ships like peasants. Just sort of glorious, sort of. I described it at some point as like, what if the Royal Navy ran into a math department? And that's sort of what I wanted to convey with my. And I was just like, sold. I'm done. Like, yep, that's it. And so that's how I picked it.
Wow. Sorry, I'm just letting that marinate for a second. What if the Royal Navy ran into a math department? Okay, got it. Josh, how about yours?
I play Legio Zistobiax, which was the Legio that had strong ties with 1,000 Suns, so they actually had kind of a sub-forge on Prospero. The only real engagement they were on for the Horus Heresy was the burning of Prospero, and they go kind of apeshit. Like they were dubbed traitorous, obviously because of their involvement with 1,000 Suns and how they got thrown under the bus for that whole thing. But they also didn't necessarily play by the rules in the sense that they were very happy to dabble with alien archaeotech and things like that and play around with kind of forbidden technology and a little bit of kind of psychic resonance and things like that. So I've always had a big affinity for 1,000 Suns. So when this game came out, that was the natural kind of choice that I just gravitated towards. So they don't actually have officially supported rules. So I've been using the custom Legio rules to kind of find something that strikes that balance of alien archaeotech, a little bit of kind of psychic dabbling and things like that. So as I've found a couple options that fit pretty well. I'll be super happy to move to whatever rules come out, if official rules ever come out for the Legio, like if they ever do a Burning of Prospero book, which I hope they do someday. I will double down on whatever they put out for that, because it'll be awesome and super fitting to the Legio. But there's a pretty good mix of things in the custom rules to flavor to taste.
Yeah. And mine, as I mentioned in past episodes, is real easy. I was like, I don't know shit about the game, and I wanted to start painting, and I just sent a text to Josh in Austin, who couldn't make it for this episode, and I was like, you guys know me, you know how I roll. What am I going to enjoy? And it didn't take long for people to agree and settle on Furians. Are like, you like aggressive shit, and I think you guys just wanted to make me paint yellow, which isn't a thing that I enjoy or am good at doing. And I was like, it's going to be a challenge to work purple into that scheme at all, and it's not like just all cold tones, and I'm into it. And then after learning the rules for the game, even just a little bit, and then reading it, I was like, oh yeah, no, you guys know me. You didn't do me dirty on this one. So
it had to be Ember Wolves or Furians. There was only two options for you anyways.
Yeah. And with Ember Wolves, I didn't want to start out with, that would be like, hey, welcome to 40K. Here's Harlequins. Like that's just not a good way to go. But oh yeah, it will go there. It will go there hard. So, Eric, take us into the basic rules. What are, which is a super loaded question, because there's
read me the rule book.
Just explain the game.
So the key to Adeptus Titanicus is you have very few units, which means those units have crunch to them. So anyone who's like, I really miss vehicle facings in 40K, first of all, I'm with you, and second of all, Titanicus is your game. Movement is really important. It is, I think, arguably the most important phase of the game, because this will determine whether or not you are in range of things. There's no pre-measurement in this game. You have to intuit whether or not you're within 24 inches or whatever. And if you're not, you're not. And you fired your guns and they just miss because you were out of range. Facings are a thing. So a lot of your guns only face forward or face in a front arc or just a corridor or things like that. So there's a lot of nuance with moving. Sort of smaller Titans are faster and can turn more. There's a lot of things you can do to sort of boost that. So you can make your Titan move a little more or turn a little more and all of those things. And all of those things then feed into, I think, really what the core mechanic of the game is, which is managing the heat of your Titan. Mm-hmm. So each Titan basically has a small nuclear reactor in it. Those get hot. And as they get hotter, you're going to start damaging yourself. And so what you're trying to do is balance, can I do all the cool things but each of those things is going to make my reactor a little bit hotter. And reactors different Titans have different reactors. So for example, the Warhound Titan, we mentioned this for the Direwolf. The Warhound has a very short reactor. Warhounds get hot fast. So you can't do a lot of crazy, wacky things with a Warhound before you're starting to take some big risks. Whereas a Warlord Titan has a much longer reactor track, has more chances to do things like cool it down, so you can do a little bit more, but there's still sort of a risk reward for a lot of different things. So if you want to make, for example, in one turn, if you're just like, YOLO, if you're going to, make a Warlord move faster, strengthen its shields, and fire 2 volcano cannons, like you're running hot, and that's a big risk. Your Titan can start taking damage because in the setting, Titans are sort of semi-autonomous. And so your Titan may just say no. and if your Titan is a corrupted Titan, it may really say no. And then also, like, if your reactor is running hot, hits to your reactor are dangerous. And they're going to start causing more problems. So there's this very sort of delicate, cool things Titan can do with spending heat on them resource mechanic that is, I think, really engaging. And all of this is expressed on each of your units has a terminal, which is essentially a character sheet with little tokens for how well your void shields are doing and how hot your reactor is and where the damage is on your body and what weapons you're carrying. So it's a game where there's a lot of crunch, but you only have, a big Titanicus game in terms of number of models is something like the Ember Wolves. Mm-hmm. And they've got like 6 Warhounds. Yeah. It's you're not keeping track of that many Titans, but each of those is very refined. Someone, I think it was the Age of Darkness podcast, said this sort of feels like the best game to run like a naval warfare game, because it essentially that's what it is. You're sort of managing, keeping things going, keeping your shields up, keeping your weapons up on these very complicated but very few units. And it's I think a really interesting sort of counterpoint to something like the 9th edition of 40K, which is a game I love, but where movement is just, well, what direction do you want to go in? Facing doesn't matter. The movement is much more abstracted, and it's sort of like, this is where this unit sort of is, but it could be facing any of these directions, etc. In Adeptus Titanicus, no. Your Titan is facing this direction, and what 45 degrees come off of that is important. Mm-hmm. And so that's sort of the basic rules is working from there, and the goal is to fire folks' void shields, bring down their void shields, and then start doing damage to their Titans.
And I put into the notes a little bit later, I put, hear me out. What elements from this game would you like to see in Battlefleet Gothic? I'm just going to sprinkle these in because I'm deferring to you guys for all the rule things on this, but this is the part of the game where Josh, you and Austin both knew that I would be all over it, because imagine if you're familiar with Battlefleet Gothic, imagine getting rid of escorts for the most part and just playing with cruisers. Like if you're going to play one of the missions and play like 5 or 6 cruisers on 5 or 6 cruisers, but then adding that mechanic of, because you're keeping track of shields, facing an arc matters. There's all the sort of strategic movement. How much you can turn is very similar. You have templates for turning and figuring out your firing arcs, and your weapons have different firing arcs. Some can just, have a corridor straight to the front. Some have other things. But this is where the game reminds me a lot of Battlefleet Gothic. And this is something that they have to redo Battlefleet Gothic at some point. Like, they will just be printing money. That's the only thing that's going to make me stop paying attention to this game, is if they do Battlefleet Gothic just a little bit. But adding that reactor mechanic is huge. And there's a reactor die that you roll when you go to push your reactor. And if I remember correctly, there's two ones, two twos, a machine spirit roll, and then nothing. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So what that means is, if you roll a 2, you have to bump your reactor up 2 things on this track. And when you get all the way to the right, you're at destination fucked. And that's where bad things happen. So that there is risk reward on that. Because if you're doing something with the Warhound, you could roll it and absolutely nothing happens. It's like, hey, congratulations. YOLO's feels good today. Or you can push it, and now all of a sudden you are two points along on this thing. That destination fucked is much closer for a warlord than it is, or for a Warhound, than it is for a warlord. And in the machine spirit one, like you mentioned, there's a table that you roll on, and it's like the machine spirit of the Titan can just decide, nope, this is what we're doing now. Or if you play Furians, you get to decide. They kind of look at you and they're like, hey, are you thinking what I'm thinking? They're like, fuck yeah, I am. Let's go.
Let's do it. Nice. So it's a beautiful resource management. And there is the risk reward there, like pushing a Warhound to maneuver to really get it where you need it to, so it can take advantage of side armor or rear armor, or like really maximize its squadron ability, which is more complex in there. Like, again, if you roll 2 on that reactor dice, a Warhound goes from green to orange immediately. There's four color shades on the reactor dice, and orange, like, there are consequences in orange. Like in the repair phase, you are rolling on the reactor chart to see if you're going to lose your shields or something like that, or you can potentially take hits on your body. But if you're in the red and you go into that phase, like, you could just potentially blow up right there on the spot. Like, So having that kind of risk reward, and how that ties into the game so well with, I can do an extra thing. I can push my Titan to get it where it really needs to be maximally effective here. But then there might be a consequence because I've done that, because now the reactor's going to start going critical, and I'm going to lose my shields because of that, which now makes it vulnerable. So, I think Eric covered it pretty brilliantly there. I'd say the one thing just to reinforce there, that movement really matters. Cover really matters in this game too. Way more so than I think 40K does these days. Facing matters, movement matters, positioning, all that. And there's just cool interactions in the game with Titans and scale. Carapace weapon's a great example of that. Like, if there's a smaller Titan in front of you, but it's within the number of inches less than your scale, like, you can't shoot that top carapace weapon at that Titan because you're too tall. Like, those guns can't physically point down at that thing to shoot it, which I think is just a kind of a cool way. So that, again, makes movement matter. Like, I'm this little Titan, but if I run up right next to this Reaver, that Reaver can't shoot me with his top carapace gun because it's too high in the sky. He can't aim down that low. So just neat opportunities.
And similarly, at 2 inches, you're under their void shields. So, the appeal of something like, why would you push a Warhound, is if you can, get it to the point where it is up under a Warlord's shields in the rear, you're getting a ton of bonuses for having done that. And so there is that sort of, I think, that tactical satisfaction with having sort of outmaneuvered your opponent is a really sort of important thing in this game, where you get a lot of things. And I think one of the nice parts about reactor management is that's also where, we've talked a lot about sort of the homogeneity of what units everybody has access to. How you treat your reactors is one of the places where your preferred play style comes in. Are you saving it for that one perfect, brilliant moment where, okay, now's the time. Everybody push their reactors this turn and, deliver the killing blow. Or there are people who are just notoriously just redlining their reactors all the time and have somehow prepped for, my Warhounds might explode. That's okay, because they're up in the enemy's formations when Titans explode. That's not necessarily a bad thing for you. So there's definitely different ways to play that game where, you can just redline it all day, every day. And, sometimes that'll work real well.
Yep.
You just keep pushing your reactors and keep pushing that no additional heat. The world is your oyster. And then, some days that goes real wrong real fast. And that's a play style. And then there's a play style where, yeah, you hold back, you try to, marshal your reactor dice, and then, yeah, for like one great and glorious turn, you're just like, okay, this is it. Light the reactors, let's go. And those are very different play styles with very different approaches to things. And so you get a lot of expression of, it's like command points in 40K. There's the people who start with 12 command points and they're gone by the first turn. And then there's the people who, dole them out one at a time to make sure that, the right thing goes off. So I think there's a lot of sort of your expression of what your reactor management ends up looking like in your play style.
I feel extremely seen by that last conversation. And
as I was saying that, I was basically staring at Brian, being like, all hot all the time. Let's go.
And I had a big shit-eating grin on my face and was holding up my hand like, it's me. So
there's been a number of games where I've seen people pushing their Titans like into that red, and then just running that Titan into the middle of the field and be like, okay, it's either going to do exactly what I want to, or it's going to blow up, and that's cool too. And then there's enough times I've seen those cascading reactions of a Titan blows itself up because it's pushed its reactor, but that ends up taking another Titan out, which then cascades and takes another Titan out because of, which is just such a fun cinematic way that the game plays itself out.
Yeah. So like Josh, the last game that we played, you had a Reaver that turned around and engaged two Warlords that I'd moved up into its rear arc. And I was just firing the Warlords into the Warhounds just straight into combat, and they could scatter back and they could take hits on their own thing. But you're like, look, these things are going to be hosed. As soon as he swings at these Warhounds, they're going to go. I don't really have a great course of action with them. But I mean, that whole, well, if this blows up, what can happen? So when another Reaver walked up and into its rear arc and just, kneecapped it with a chain fist, and then because they're the same scale, was able to fire the Apocalypse missile launcher, which is really made to just take shields out. It's a low strength weapon, but one of the great mechanics on this is as your armor, as you start taking hits, there's different types of hits that you could take where you're basically, it's almost like a 40K armor penetration roll from back in the day. But it's like you roll a die and add it to the strength of the weapon. There's a minimum level where you just cause a single hit, so you move a thing. There are ones where you can cause more hits or you can cause critical damage on it. And the more damage that you've taken, the further you go to the right, destination fucked being all the way on the right, the lower your roll is that you need to actually do damage. So things that normally can't hurt things when they're at full strength, you get them wounded where they're down literally on their last tick and things are going to blow up, and all of a sudden that kind of stuff works. So there aren't a lot of, I think the important thing with that is that this will lead into the activation game thing that you guys are going to talk about. It's a little weird that more so than Battlefleet Gothic was, where Battlefleet Gothic, there aren't a lot of specialist ships in Battlefleet Gothic. Like they all can kind of do a little bit of stuff, but maybe Mars class ships have all lances, but they do have torpedoes. They can do some stuff. And it's like with Titans, you really kind of want more generalists, unless you're like really spamming. Like I have 5 Reavers, so I can have the YOLO dual chain fist, which I need to make really soon.
Which is always hilarious. And I think that's a good point. There's 2 sort of general types of weapons. And as Titans start breaking down and, taking hits, they start merging. But because there's 2 different damage mechanics. There's while your void shields are up, and there's while your void shields are down. And while your void shields are up, all you're doing is taking hits to your void shields. And so what you're trying to do is you're trying to provoke lots of saves.
Yeah.
Because that's essentially, if you imagine it, the classic, electric blue field with the little blossoms of fire on it, that's taking void shield hits. And so for that, you want high number of shot weapons, but the strength doesn't matter because it's just, did you hit the void shield or didn't you? So Vulcan mega bolters, Apocalypse missile launchers, things like that, various Gatling guns where you're just hammering shields are really good because your Titan can't take damage until its shields are down, unless you get up under it. But for the most part, you're just safe. And so the big hitters, Melta cannons or Bellicosa volcano cannons, which are the things, Warlords mount, those do one hit. That's not good against void shields.
Right.
Because worst case, your void shields go down by 1. And when your void shields blow, they get rid of all the attacks that were being made against that. So it's just your void shields just explode in a burst of energy.
Yeah.
Then at the same time, there are the big hitters. Melta cannons, Bellicosa volcano cannons, various lasers. Those are, okay, your shields are down. Now I'm going to do high strength hits that are going to get through your armor and start actually doing damage to your Titan. And so you need to take both. You can't just bring big hitters.
Yeah.
Because your opponent's void shield will never go down.
Right.
You can't just bring, the high strength things, because those will tear through the void shields and then you'll be stuck. And then towards the end, you do get really interesting mechanics where like I said, if it's a damaged Titan and you've gotten in the rear and it's already sort of in trouble, then all of a sudden a Vulcan Mega Bolter is really dangerous because, your armor's already degraded and you're starting to just, fire up into the reactor and things go bad fast. So there's a really sort of fun balance with what types of weapons you bring. And similarly for sort of melee weapons, there is no melee phase. There is just weapons with extremely short ranges that get to ignore void shields because you're in that short range. Those weapons are really, really dangerous. But they're only,
hard to get there, but they're
so only
effective
2-inch ranges.
Yeah.
And so one of the things is a Warlord Titan with 2 power fists is absolutely terrifying if it gets into combat. But it is slow and unmaneuverable. And so, your opponent's going to spend the whole game trying to dance around the just bubble of death that is your Warlord with two power fists. And so there's a really interesting sort of mechanic there that I think is fun and gives you that sense of again, movement is really important because, did you get into a side arc? Can that Warlord turn and charge you? Or is it too slow to do that? Those are all really important sort of aspects to things that get you into the sort of meat of the game.
I think naturally one thing that just brings to mind is how well balanced this game is in general, not only unit to unit, but Titan to Titan. You're either, fast and maneuverable, lightly armored, lightly armed, or you're, slow, clunky, and super powered, tons of shields, tons of reactor, huge guns. But even looking at the weapons, like a volcano cannon, for example, is the highest strength weapon you can shoot in the game, and it shoots a template, which can be devastating. You can just devastate knights, things like that. But because it's shooting a template, it means you can't make targeted shots with it. So it's fairly indiscriminate in how it hits. And just something to mention on the terminals, you have multiple locations on your Titan's body. You've got legs, you've got body, you've got weapons, and you've got head. And in order to blow up a Titan, you need to completely max out the damage track on one of those things, not the weapons. Weapons can be repaired. But so you get these hugely powerful weapons, but they're fairly indiscriminate on how they hit because it's just this giant explosion. So you can't do kind of the finesse shot to really polish things off. Where then you get those kind of mid-range weapons like a laser destructor or laser destroyer, which are kind of medium strength, medium quantity of dice, volume of dice, but they're really good for those kind of finishing off Titans with those targeted shots. It's just the balance throughout the game, I think, is pretty fantastic.
And for people that are unfamiliar with it, I mean, there is a ballistic skill that your Titans have. Let's say you hit on a 3+. There are things that'll modify it. Some weapons at long range are harder to hit. At close range might be easier to hit. So you can have plus, or modifiers based on that. But to make a targeted shot, you're doing whatever your ballistic skill is at -2. So, but when you have something that's wounded, if you have three critical damage locations on a Reaver's legs, you are going for that because it's better to do that than it is to try to just keep crippling the thing and taking it down. It's when you have a chance for a kill shot, you go for a kill shot. And that's where, you were mentioning a melee, if you're in it, you can attack a location that you can see, so if you're Yeah, I noticed your knee's a little fucked up there, sir. I'm going to go ahead and swing my chain fist at that, and bad things happen.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's where Josh mentioned that's where cover comes in. Is cover is a minus to hit.
Yeah.
And in a game without very many rerolls and without many buffs to hit, a minus to hit is a big deal.
Yeah.
Because if that crippled Reaver is behind full cut, so 50% obscured, that's a -2 to hit. You can't do called shots because you can't hit.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of things there. And I think that's actually a really good segue to the sort of next thing we have in this, which is the activation part of the game.
Yeah.
Which is, again, part of the balancing, which is, as Brian has titled it, is why not just take 5 warlords? And the answer is because there are points limits. So, like, you are playing, you can play, a 1750 game or whatever. But there is a question of, so why not just take 3 warlords instead of 6 warhounds? And Josh, do you want to go into why that might be a bad idea?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of reasons. One, because of the balance we talked about with just maneuverability and weapons loadouts that different Titan types are able to bring. But the other one is it is an alternating activation game.
Yeah.
So if somebody, in that example there, you've got 6 Warhounds against 3 Warlords, the Warhound player is getting 3 extra activations in any given game turn. So they can, move 3 Titans, and then the 3 Warlords have matched those movements, and then 3 Warhounds know exactly where their opponents are going to be and can lay up those shots to get those important flanking shots, those rear armor strike shots. They can merge their void shields together. There's all kinds of cool things that happen when you know where your opponent's Titans are ending their movement. You can move outside of their arcs that they're firing with. Yeah. So they have these giant guns that are now useless because you've been able to walk outside of those. It's a really cool strategy, and there's a just ton of constant back and forth throughout the game, which is appealing in the sense that not only is it strategic and tactical the whole time, but you're also engaged in the game the whole time. Even on your opponent's turn, you're really interested in what they're doing, where they're moving, how they've positioned, how they've faced.
Yeah, there's very rarely a like, okay, I'm going to go get a beer.
Right.
Let me know when you're done.
Right.
I'll be back. And that activation thing is just so important, both for the number of activations and what order they go in.
Yes.
So, if you've got something really lined up and there's orders that can modify when something happens. If you've got a shot lined up and you're doing what's called first fire, which means you get to shoot while everybody else is moving, you want to do that early before everybody scatters outside of your line of fire. If you have a charge that you want to line up, you want to make sure your opponent has moved before you charge, because if you charge and then they move away, there's no locking people in combat. They've just moved.
Yeah.
And so, you went stomping forward and then they just whoop to the side, and now you're potentially really vulnerable and you've given up a lot of your maneuverability. So that activation is a really important thing, and that is one of the trade-offs with what if I just bring, a bunch of super heavy hitters, is you don't have as many activations. Yeah. You need to be really careful, because if one of those warlords is wasted for a turn, that's a third of your army is just sitting there doing nothing. And that's potentially devastating. I think everyone who's played this game for more than like one game has definitely somehow blown the activation order and had some beautiful, perfect plan and just been like, oh, well, I can't do that now.
Yeah. This takes one of my favorite mechanics from Battlefleet Gothic, where you aren't alternating activations, you're doing all of your stuff, but the order that you shoot things in is how you do anything, right? Because you have to take shields down. And so to me, this just takes the alternating activation thing up to 11, as far as it going back and forth. And God damn it, it's glorious. But,
the types of Titans you have matters then too.
Yes.
Is like maybe you've got a Warhound and it's got a Mega Bolter that's up close, and you got the exploding 6s because of the rapid trade on that and all that. And it's amazing at stripping shields. It's not necessarily going to take a Titan down, but you activate that Titan first in the combat phase, which is shooting and melee attacks. You strip the shields off something, and then you let a warlord that has a big gun actually hit and do that damage without having to worry about stripping shields down and things like that, because the other Titan's already done that job for it. So you can kind of bring the weapons specialties to bear to full front.
And this is just a Drakari player in me. There's also things too where you use your movement and your activations you can use them to try to herd your opponent and give them bad options too. So there's always that sort of that chess game element is always there with the alternating activation thing. And just, like you were saying, there isn't, like in 40K, like I can get up and go check out the store shelves and, go hit the head for a second while you're doing your movement phase, because there's no interaction in it, and with a game like 40K, like one of my criticisms currently is that with secondaries, there's so many things that you're doing where you're not actually really interacting with your opponent all that much. And in this game, you're both constantly engaged, which is really fun. And think good and bad things are happening to both of you at the same time. So I think it kind of adds to that whole like fun, jovial, but tactical and crunchy experience, which makes the game. It does
even
this.
Losing a Titan, like it's devastating and exciting for both players.
Oh yeah,
depending on how the roll goes.
Yeah,
a Titan going up is never not fun.
No, yeah, absolutely.
even when it's yours. Like I am extremely excited when I blow up one of my opponent's Titans.
Yeah,
I am only a little bit less excited.
Yes,
when I blow up one of mine. I mean, there's a because I like rolling on tables. There's a table you get to roll on for like, okay, what happens? And it's worse if your reactor is running hot.
Yeah.
So, that guy who just charged his Warhounds in with their reactors at the red line, there's a reason for that. And it's that they turn into little nuclear bombs when they blow up. And then there's effects of that. Titans can fall down. They can essentially decide that they're taking some of you with them and just fire their weapons at the closest target as they fall. They can just detonate. Yeah. And invariably when this happens, one of the interesting things about Titanicus is the pacing. There's turn 1 is mostly cagey movement. Turn 2 is a lot of, shots at people's shields. And then at about turn 3 and 4, things start coming apart at the seams. And literally one of the best things that ever happens in this game is a Titan goes up and it kills another Titan, and that Titan goes up, and this just carries on. That
cascade is so beautiful.
One of my best games recently. One of my Warhounds got behind my opponent's Warhound, blew it up. That blew up my Warhound. That Warhound blew up the Reaver that had gotten behind it. And then the game was done. There was just one of my Reavers just standing there going, what happened to literally everybody else? And just 3 craters sitting in front of him going yep, that's how that goes.
Yeah. And
so I think that's one of the best parts of this game is it's exciting when your units die. It's not disappointing. Yeah. You don't just pick up your models and put them on a sideboard and go, well, shit, what do I do now?
Yeah.
It's like, well, oh no, that did bad things. It can do bad things to you. It can do bad things to them. It's great fun. You are absolutely allowed to yell engine kill when it happens, because why not?
It's always well deserved.
Yeah. Yes. It's just a fun and interactive thing. There's what Brian said, there's never a part of the game where you're not interacting with your opponent.
Right.
And importantly, one of the things that is sort of a core rule that we haven't touched on is your objectives can be asymmetrical.
Yeah.
So your opponent can be trying to push into your deployment zone while you're trying to kill a particular Titan of theirs, and their secondary is to, rescue a downed Princeps and run off the board. Those are all things happening at the same time. So it also means you can be winning and your opponent can feel like they're winning at the same time. And you can do things like, as you mentioned, in the spirit of the Drukhari, if your opponent needs to get to the other side of the board, you can start fencing them in and saying okay, you need to get to the other side of the board, but over on that other side of the board are some bad choices for you.
Yeah.
Or getting there. You can push your movement, but that means you're not going to shoot, and I am going to be able to shoot. So there's a lot of interaction and a lot of things, and it goes all the way to when Titans explode. And it's the best mechanic in the game is Titans blowing up.
The best mechanic on top of a whole series of books of amazing mechanics.
Indeed.
Well, a mechanic I don't know if it's not amazing. This is the part of the game that I am the absolute least drawn to. Knights exist in this game. I have 2 because they come in the starter box. I have 0 plans to buy any on purpose. How are they used, and why are they used?
Yeah, knights are interesting because they actually they don't play in all phases of the game, which is interesting. Like they don't have any kind of damage control phase. You don't repair knights; they're kind of the single use commodity. You can kind of use them as a screen. The Lancers can be extremely effective taking Titans down if they get charges off. Like they can be a good distraction. They can be a good activation, a use of an activation, like 3 Questoris Knights in your our previous example where we had 3 Warlords, but then you also have a unit of 3 Questoris Knights. That's an extra activation that didn't cost a lot of points. Like maybe you're just filling in some points to get some activations with minimal threat. But some knights can be super effective also, just depending on if you maneuver them carefully. They're obviously fragile. They don't repair. But if they are able to do the thing that they are designed to do, they tend to do that pretty well.
Yeah. So I think knights are interesting as a supplemental force to Titans. So, bringing a Lance of Knights has a couple interesting things because also, we've mentioned movement a lot. Knights move like 40k units. Their facing doesn't matter. They have infinitely many turns. They just go where they want to go.
And they're pretty quick too.
And they're pretty quick. And importantly, in this game, they're small, so they can hide.
Right.
And so, you can do something where you're like, yeah, you have to come around this building, but there's a banner of knights lurking behind it. And if the knights most people play get into close combat with you, that's a bad day for the Titan. You don't want knights up in you. That's very dangerous, but they are extremely fragile. We've talked about the Bellicosa Volcano Cannon. One of those will just erase a unit of knights. They're just gone. So they're sort of this interesting, very tactically flexible, very dangerous if they get close, but very, very, very fragile supplement to a force, which I think is really interesting. The one I struggle with more is you can just field knights as their own army. And this is, I think back to when I played Warhammer Fantasy Battles, I really wanted to play vampire counts. And someone who was a veteran player was like, I don't know that you should do that as your first army because you don't interact with morale at all, and that's a really important part of this game. And you don't interact with the shooting phase at all. You learn nothing about the shooting phase of this game.
Yeah.
Because vampires at the time had no shooting. Knights as their own army are sort of similar. You don't really learn reactor management. You don't really learn repairing. They're very maneuverable, but they also, ironically, as their own formations, because they have to move in sort of banners, they don't have very many activations. And so they're sort of they play strangely. They're actually a remarkably hard army to play as their own.
Yeah.
And then occasionally you get the especially strange like knight army versus knight army matchup. That's just like, what if we just threw out 80% of the rules of this game? But it is possible.
You don't get the fun explosions. You don't get the reactor management. Only really one of the orders matters at that point.
Yeah.
Too.
I like knights as a supplement to a Titan force. If you want to sort of go that way, you could see that, especially with like they're useful for like a Warhound force because now you're just like everybody's going forward.
Yeah.
Or you can use them to sort of screen the flank of an unmaneuverable warlord. You can say, yeah, you can get in my flanks, but there's a unit of knights sort of hiding under the warlord's skirt, waiting for you to try to do that. So there's good ways to do that. But I think there are a lot of knights in this game. Like now they've come out with armigers, which is even tinier knights that are even more the things we just described. And I think that the answer to that is a lot of this is Forge World has the CAD files for these things and can make them. Sort of a lot of this has someday there will be epic written all over it. Yeah. As look, we made these models. So they're sort of interesting. The knight Porphyrons, the big knights, those have caused probably the biggest balance issues in the game. They're a little bit too good. So there's some things like that sort of affect how knights play in gameplay in a way that's sort of problematic. But I as I said, I really like them as like I took a banner of knights in this army. The two you get in the starter box, you get 2 lancers. Yeah. Like add a 3rd lancer, and that is all the knights most people will ever need. I think I theoretically have enough models. They're not painted to field a knight army. I really have no intention of doing that outside like a narrative scenario, the last charge of House whoever, before they die in the Horus Heresy, something like that.
Sure.
Which they very likely will.
Yeah, which they very likely will, because that's the other thing. Knights, for 40k players, you're picturing your knight as sort of the centerpiece of your army and durable. Knights die by the handful in Titanicus. Like stray shots will take out a banner of 3 knights, and you're just like, well, yep, they're gone.
And remember, we still have 5-inch templates in this game.
Yeah. We still got template weapons, and you're just like, yep, I hit all of them.
That's the entire group of knights.
Wow. Yeah, that almost reminds me of. So in Battlefleet Gothic, I'm one of the weirdos that just doesn't like escorts. Like I don't, because like you were mentioning, I hadn't really thought of it this way, but they really do. They ignore all the fun stuff like damage. They take a hit and they're one and done. So you don't get all the cool management of trying to repair weapons or, those types of things. It's like, oh, the shield's gone. All right, the next one, and it's dead. And that's all that you get, and it's not fun. So yeah, I mean, just as a newer player, I look at knights and I'm like, I get how you could round out points with them. And the models are awesome looking. I'm just not excited about them on any level because I'm here for all the other just pushing your reactor and crazy bullshit that the game offers. And I'm like, you mean, so I'm playing the game, but I don't get all the dessert part? No, thanks. So 2 last points on this, and then we're definitely going to take a break because, man, we have plowed straight into this. I think we have all this pent up energy from talking about doing this episode for longer than we should have. Josh, you wanted to give a shout out to their campaign system.
Yeah, just something worth noting is that because there is so much depth and crunch to the gameplay of this game, like the campaign system is set up in a really cool way. There's actually a couple. There's kind of 2 main options now. But I'll just do a general overview of how the campaign plays out. And these things lend themselves really well to either a map-based campaign or just kind of virtual theater of the mind arena, or however you do it. But the one thing that I really like about how the campaign plays is because you can track so many things in a game. Like with that terminal, you've got kind of your snapshot of what's happening in the game. Everything really matters in campaign play. So if your Titan is damaged at the end of a game, then that damage is going to carry over to your next game unless you spend kind of requisition points in order to like facilitate repairs. And depending on how your games have gone, you might be short on points. You can actually, like, your Titan crews can gain experience. So your Titan might die, but your crew survives. So you can take this now experienced Titan crew and put them into a new Titan that you've requisitioned, and then they get they have a better ballistic skill or something like that because they're just a more experienced crew. Just really cool little ways. It's kind of like Crusade, 40k Crusade on for AT. Just really, really cool cinematic things that happen. Like if a Titan dies but doesn't just completely blow up when it goes, and you win that battle, you can scavenge the battlefield and claim the weapons that Titan had and add them to your arsenal. So now you get free weapons that you can add to Titans and things like that. It's just a really cool way that things track because that terminal works so well of showing you the state of things, like the condition of weapons, the damage that's on Titans, and all that. And it just plays out in such a beautiful narrative way that has that kind of depth and crunch to it that's really easy to track at the same time. You're not doing fun paperwork, as we call for Necromunda and Crusade, things like that. But that stuff, it just translates so well in such a fun narrative way. I can't really explain it another way, but it's a cool system.
And I've always wanted to play an attrition campaign in 40k where you lost that Land Raider. That Land Raider's gone.
Right.
And I think that's one of the fun things in this campaign is because of that granularity, you can be like, your legs are real broken. Like you're going to go slow next game. And I think, as we've talked about that risk reward, that adds another layer to that. That I can win this game, but at what cost?
Yes. And
what position does that put me in for later games? Do I really want to risk, one of my, headliner Titans being gone?
Yeah.
So
is campaigns are not for Brian, but
yeah. Yeah, I'm listening to this going,
nope,
I would be out in the second round. All my shit would be dead because I do want to go for everything.
And then I think Josh put this in, but I sort of agree with him here. The open engine war deck is a great way to play this game. For those of you who aren't familiar with the sort of various open war decks that are now out for, I think, most of GW's systems, it's essentially a random draw of your mission. So, you draw sort of a battlefield and a primary objective and a complication and some other things. And I really like it because, first of all, like, variety is the spice of life, and you get decidedly not samey feelings to this. When we do it, we usually give each player one veto for just like, yeah, that doesn't seem fun. Things like that, where it's just like, okay, so sometimes randomness is not a great idea. And I think the other thing that's nice about it is and this is one of the things that I have trouble with secondaries in 40K, where you get to choose them, is people tend to optimize their armies for their secondaries. You're like, okay, I'll be able to do this, and this my first game, or my first turn, I'll be able to do this, and turn 2, I'll be able to do this. With the open war deck, you've just found out what your mission is.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, if you took those 3 big, heavy-hitting warlords, and now you've got to get across the board to burn an objective, you need to think about how you're going to do that.
Yeah.
So, it sort of punishes armies that are very one-note, and it just makes things more sort of tactically interesting, where you're like, yeah, like I need to push forward because that's the objective, even if that's not what I'd prefer to be doing. And so I really like how it sort of puts everybody sort of a little bit off balance in terms of mission design, and it just gives you a lot of different really fun combinations. So like we had one that was really fun that you both had to do that pushing, but then it was on unstable ground. So if you moved faster, there was a possibility you'd essentially damage your Titan's legs as they essentially twisted their ankles.
Wow.
Like that. So that's weird. Like I want to move fast, but I don't want to go so fast that I start hurting myself. Is a really interesting sort of, again, a risk reward. There's balancing there and things like that. So I really like the open engine war deck. I think it's out of print now.
I did not see it on GW site this morning when I checked, but if you could find it, it's absolutely worth it. There's a couple really fun. I've played several games now that have interacted with how reactors are managed too. Either like you're close to something that is off-putting radiation, so it like if you're just within vicinity, you're immediately like cranking your reactor up a point, or it makes it harder to vent because something like the planets each have their own characteristic, which interacting with the kind of the core rules, mechanics, things like that makes for a really interesting game. Sometimes they're much quicker games because Titans are going to blow up faster as their reactors go red line real quick, but they just interact in a great way with the core mechanics of the game.
I also tend to ignore this with 40K because I sort of hit the too many rules threshold. But a lot of the campaign books have environmental rules for fighting in particular areas. So you'll have, there's a dust storm, everyone's taking a void shield hitter to a turn and things like that. Where again, because the game is crunchy and because there's less units, you can sort of remind yourself of those things. And those are really fun to sort of change up how you think about, what happens if you can't rely on your Warhounds ever having void shields is sort of a scary prospect for the Warhounds.
Right.
So there's a lot of things like that that are really, really quite fun to look into for, some of the old campaign books are at this point rules wise have been consolidated into other books.
Yeah. But
there's still, little fun tidbits of both lore and environmental type campaign settings that are fun.
Yeah. And we're just skimming the surface of all the rules on this. When you really start getting into it, again, the resource management, the crunch, there's a perfect balance of all of it. So let's take a break here because the only thing that's as awesome as the rules in this game are the models for it. So on the other side of the break, let's go into the actual hobby side of the thing and then looking at if you're a beginner and you go into this, where do you go? Okay, in the last half, let's go into the models and getting into the game. This is what already had me AT-18 curious to begin with, and the rules put me over the edge. But let's go into the meat here. Before we go in, let's actually start with the opportunities of the scale. So 8mm scale, I've painted 6mm, right? I've painted Epic, 28mm. Drop Zone Commander is in 10, I believe, if I remember correctly. So I think
it's 10.
Yeah, I've painted around this scale, but Titans at this scale are perfect because a Warlord is kind of about the size of a 40k Imperial Knight, correct?
It's a little bit smaller, but yeah, like a Leviathan Dreadnought is, I think, a good... It's a little bit bigger than that, a little bit smaller than a Knight. But yeah, they're big models. You know, it's 8mm, but they're big models.
Yeah. And like a Reaver is about the height of a Redemptor, but not quite as grapefruit round, you know, and a Warhound is about the size of a Box Dread, right? So a little deeper. But so the scale itself really lends itself for, if you start going into all the heraldry, it isn't so small that you're going to go blind doing it. Right. And it allows you to get in. The kits come with most of, like the Warhound, you get all of the options in it, except for like the Forge World Lance and Ursa's Claw upgrades. So going into like the scale itself for modeling, what kind of unique opportunities does that offer versus playing 40K?
So I think, Brian, as you mentioned, one of the big things is you can, both because of the scale and the number, you can go really deep into making the Titans really intricate. And it's not so small that you're going to go crazy, but it's not so big that you're like, I need to make how many check marks? Mm-hmm. So like you can do, and I think that's one of the things is because of the way Titans are all based on sort of very individual heraldry, you can start playing with transfers at different scales. You can start doing a little freehand and you're like, yeah, at 8mm, this looks fine. You can touch on details. I think this is a really good and interesting scale for doing weathering in.
Yeah.
Because you have to be really subtle about it. Because if you weather something up to a Titan's knees, you're like, okay, what mud puddle did it walk through that was like
three-story building?
Right.
So like you can do things where you like very subtly weather the feet and sort of think about where you can start experimenting with things, but you're not committing to like, so I'm weathering a 40k army. I need to buy like a crate of pigment. So I think you get a lot of really unique opportunities at this scale, and it's a good balance because it is small models of big units that you can really play around with a lot of detail, but a lot of the stuff that would sort of really just drown you can sort of ignore. Like the chassis of the Titan, you can mostly just paint in whatever sort of metallic scheme you want, and then a bunch of armor plates are going to go on it. So like it doesn't have to look magnificent.
Unlike a 40k army, say your batch painting 50 Marines that very, are going to look almost identical, minus whatever weapons they're holding or something like that. There's absolutely nothing that says any of your Titans have to be identical for heraldry that you're painting. There's actually, in fact, most of them shouldn't be the same. So it gives you a lot of opportunity because of the small model count and because of the scale to play around with things, caution stripes, checkerboards, heraldry, banners, chains, whatever you want to do. Corrupted Titans, again, what we've mentioned before. Basing, I think, is a huge opportunity here where you can include buildings. I've seen a lot of people resin printing actually like epic scale Marines or tanks or things like that, and just making almost this little diorama base for a Titan, because again, you have say 5-6 Titans, and that is your Legion. You can do some really fun narrative things that really bring the whole model to life. A very small commitment in both models and time.
Yeah, that's what I ended up doing. All my bases are these sort of little mini vignettes. Colin Ward painted. I have an opposing force of Titans because I want to suck people into the game, and the best way to do that is to have a second painted Titan army. And for that, we 3D printed. He had found some essentially small scale shanty town, and so we have them just stomping through this essentially, Siege of Terror refugee camp or whatever. and just walking all over it. My Titans are all sort of on an urban type basing, and so one of them's got a broken sort of water main that's going through it. I've got one where one of the Scout Titans has 2 old Imperial Guard epic Rough Riders with it as sort of a scouting force. You've got ruined barbed wire. There's all kinds of things you can do, because at this point, between the people who love epic and the Titanicus folks, there's a lot of different both sort of kits and things that you can do. And one of the things I like about using the old epic stuff is that is at 6mm, which makes the Titans look a little bit bigger. Which I actually really like. So like I have in one of them, I have a crashed Thunderbolt fighter, and it's at 6mm, so it looks much smaller than the actual Aeronautica Imperialis Thunderbolt does. And so you can do a lot of stuff at that scale. I think the bases are a really good excuse to go sort of hog wild and do a lot of stuff with. I really like the basing opportunities for Titanicus.
Yeah, and some of the bases, I don't know. I was looking initially at some of the resin ones, and I'm trying to remember who the seller was. There's one in the UK that makes these bases that are just absolutely amazing. I mean, it looks like they're stomping through the palace at Terra, kind of a thing, or the ruins of it, and that kind of stuff. And initially, I was leaning towards doing that, and then I don't know, like you were. I think you said it in a text, Eric, where you were like, yeah, or just field muck and gubbins, just whatever, just you can throw some stuff in. And that's where I think the scale of the game, I was going to compare it to painting like an Imperial Knights army, because I've done that, right? Is that the scale is very similar. The detail level is pretty comparable, if not maybe a little better on the Titanicus stuff. But the basing is where the experience will be different, because you do need to imply scale. And if you put too much detail on your bases, then it starts to make the Titans look a little bit small, and so like I said, I ended up leaning away from those, because one, the cost was really prohibitive to do resin bases with it. But they're, I mean, if you look at like Miles David, right? You go to like, Little Legend Studio, when you look at the Titans, he's using those bases and they look absolutely phenomenal, but that's a lot of cash, for I'm painting these guys to learn the game. Like maybe when I get into my, mutated Legio, that'll be a thing I get into. So.
And I think that's a thing that's true, is I think that they look good anywhere from really detailed, stomping through urban landscapes. I bought 6 different terrain kits to do this. To just like some of the classic battles for Titanicus are Martian Earth red.
Yep.
And so I think you can do both. I think the one thing that you mentioned, Brian, that you really have to be careful of is the implied scale.
Yeah.
So at some point I saw a really well done Titan that they had put essentially corn stalks as some of the basing for whatever reason, and they're like 30 feet high.
No.
And she's like, no, you ruined it. So like you have to remember what scale you're working at. For a lot of these things, I mentioned that with weathering too. Like the weathering needs to be really subtle. If you do chipping effects, like if you do standard like sponge chipping, you're making paint chips the size of Space Marines every time you do that.
Yeah.
And so you have to sort of think about what it means to do those things. But I think you can get one of the other fun things is you can do a bunch of different, both sort of where this Legion is both spiritually and temporally. So you can do, my Storm guys are almost pristine, because as I mentioned, like they teleport down. They're not going to mess with muddy battlefields. Whereas like a Legio Mortis force in the Siege of Terra, they've been fighting the entire heresy non-stop.
They've seen some shit.
Yeah, they've definitely seen some shit.
Papa Nurgle's got them locked in.
Yeah.
You can start having fun with oils and enamels and grime washes and rust effects and things like that at a really fun scale, where you can be really subtle with it. You don't have to do a lot.
Yeah.
And because of the scale, you still get this feeling of like, man, y'all have been fighting a while.
Yeah.
And so I think there's some really great opportunities there.
It's a really cool way to tie in a narrative element or a backstory or something like that to your Legio as well. Like a lot of the kits, one thing we should talk about is just the posability of the models. But in addition to that, A lot of kits come with extra carapaces. You get a loyalist carapace, you get a traitorous carapace, you get kind of a neutral one, you get one that's got more, scrolls and banners and things like that. So there's tons of opportunity for people to take an extra carapace, a second head that came with a Titan kit, like a Warhounds are very popular for this option, where you get a couple head options and a couple carapace options, but you're only going to make one Titan out of your kit. Well, you get two full ones, but so you can use models to pose. You can pose Titans, like Reavers and Warlords are fairly popular. You'll see a lot of people making Warlords that they're, 1 foot is stomping on top of a enemy Titan, a downed Titan that is a Warhound that's on the ground there, because you have those extra kits, because the models have that posability to just lift that leg up and, rotate the ankle and things like that in an interesting way that just helps reinforce the narrative.
Man, we should just touch on the kits really quick. First of all, so for doing this episode, I went back. I was like, I want to look and see. Usually when they introduce a new game, they'll have designers come on, right? And I think around the 2018, when they put the game out, they had Forge World put a video out, and had the person that designed the initial wave of Titans. And I thought it was interesting because the Reaver kit, to me, was the first one I put together. So of course I did the noob trap thing and put the toes backwards. Because instructions is hard, and the Reaver, just from a design Reavers have always looked different to me, regardless of the version of the game. I mean, when you get into epic scale, like, they always look really distinctly different, as to where Warlords and Warhounds, I'm like, I kind of feel what they're doing there. But I thought it was really interesting that was the only one that was hand sculpted, and the rest were all done in CAD. But even the one that was hand sculpted, and they had to sort of reverse it because they thought they were going to do these in resin, all of them except magnets, right? And so when it comes to the way the kits go together, there's so much versatility in that thing. And in 40K, I used to magnetize everything. Like, I have Archons that have every option possible. Like, I have magnetized the wrist of a Kabbalite warrior. I've seen some shit. I won't go back. I don't do that anymore. When it comes to a 40K thing, I'm like, I like it enough that I'm just going to buy a fucking another one. That's what you do once you've made it, boys. But this game, magnetizing actually makes sense.
Yeah, I think for a lot of the kits, especially the larger kits, they're very obviously, like, there's mounting points for magnets.
Yeah.
The carapace weapons on Reavers is very obviously, like, magnet goes here. It's not in the instructions, but it's like magnet definitely goes here.
Yes.
And that's really nice because, you can swap things in and out. You can just buy carapace weapons packs from Forge World, things like that. The Warlord does that too. Magnetization is really straightforward for weapons. It's less straightforward if you want to do melee weapons. You got to get a little bit more creative with it. So I tend to have the melee arm is fixed, and then whatever else is magnetized. The one Titan kit I don't magnetize is Warhounds.
Right.
They're the ones that were sort of the least designed for magnets. And also, I confess the Warhound kit is like my hobby happy place. It's the perfect balance of detail, but not too much detail. Those are really posable, so you can get a lot of sort of personality out of how you pose a Warhound. Like, one of my Warhounds is really sort of noble and regal, and one of them is definitely like, oh, we're going to go commit some war crimes now. And, like, most of it is down to posing. Like, one of them looks, like, low and menacing. Yeah. So for those, I sort of have that same thing, Brian, where I'm like, look, if I want a different loadout for my Warhound weapons, I get to go buy another Warhound kit.
Right.
And that's awesome.
That's a good day. Yeah.
So, like, that's the one I don't magnetize, but anything above that, there's tons of room to do magnetization and be able to swap out weapon loadouts and things like that, which is really nice as you just want to, figure things out and experiment with them. And, I want to try something new today. You get a lot of room out of that.
Yep. And a good excuse or good reason to magnetize is that Forge World is continuing putting out weapon packs. Like, the Volkite weapon packs kind of came out of nowhere. So if you had not magnetized those Titan weapons, you'd either be buying new Titans to put them on, or you're popping off painted glue Titans there. So there's a lot of reason to magnetize, and mostly just have fun, experiment, play around with things. Like, every once in a while, I'll throw a warp missile on a Reaver. They're not great, but they're fun. Yeah. And like, let's see if it does anything this game. Maybe it will. Maybe it'll do something awesome, or maybe it's a total dud. You never know. But But it's the kind of game that's just fun to play around with options and see what happens.
Man, I fought off a lot of squirrels because, Josh, I'm trying to not be a dick, and I know you have stuff to do today. But I got to just jump into this one. When you said that Forge World, that Volkite weapons kind of came out of nowhere, didn't they also kind of just fucking go nowhere? I mean...
They're not the best, but they're thematic.
Okay.
The Warlord one is okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other two are definitely sort of a hashtag waiting for epic.
Got it. Okay, that makes more sense. Because I remember I looked up the rules because I was like, I want to love these. Because who doesn't love Death Rays? Fucking, I'm not that guy that doesn't love them. I want them to work. And then I read the rules and I was like, I don't know the game really well, but that doesn't seem like a thing I should do. And then, of course, Goonhammer had an article breaking it down. And it was like, yeah, you just use math to prove my instinct's absolutely correct. And I'm like, and they kind of don't look cool enough to wing it. But I
punch through that.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of the epic angle. So okay, there's still hope. I might still be able to pull them off.
And I mean, the thing is if they fix it, like if you got it magnetized, you're like, oh man, full cut weapons are cool now.
Right.
On the Death Ray goes.
Right.
And so that's what I've been doing a lot is like, yeah, they'll release loadouts and they won't have a weapon for them yet in plastic, and you're like, okay, the Quake Cannon's coming.
Yeah.
I'm going to magnetize this so that if I want a Quake Cannon, I've got a Quake Cannon, because it really stings if you've got like a Warlord and the weapons are glued on and you're like, oh man, but I really want to do this other thing. And so that's I think the Reaver Plus chassis are all really, really good excuses to magnetize things.
Yep. I've got 4 Warhounds and I magnetize all of them, even though I tend to, because I have 4, like I'll tend to run each one as it is anyways. Mm-hmm. So that there's not really a reason that I have them magnetized, just because I could without it didn't take me much time to figure out a good way to get those kits to be magnet compatible.
Yeah.
And I just got options in case. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember when I wanted to magnetize my Warhounds, my instinct was to do it because I'm like, they have all the weapons and I don't need to order anything. And then I was like, Vulcan Mega Bolters and Plasma Blast Guns. Pretty classic, pretty iconic, pretty dope, and I like this kit.
Real good.
It's a great combination.
I'm going with the Eric plan, and if I need more of these, I know Sky's current stock at Herrick Games is 2 boxes of 2, so I know I'm not going to run out. And when I do Ember Wolves, I'm going to have all the fix of all the Stompy Dogs.
Yep.
But
it's been fun for a couple options. Like I've run a double Inferno Cannon Warhound a couple of times, which is just double flamethrowers, which is not the best option, but it's such a mobile platform that it's really fun. But I don't necessarily want to run that every game.
No.
So it'll be like, it is good having the magnet options to.
Oh my god, that sounds like
play
fun.
Around with that. But it's a lot of fun. So.
Yeah. Well, and the thing too that, I mean, despite me just having my little sidebar there talking shit about Volkite weapons, there aren't very many options in this game that are just bad options. Like they all have a use at some point, and I think that's where on the bigger stuff, like you guys were saying, like Reaver Plus sized Reavers, Warlords, Nemesis Warbringers, and the 2 big boys. I think it's important to magnetize things, not just because it's fun to do, it's easy to do, and you have more options. It's not about an optimal loadout. It's just that as you start to go and change maniples, what you're asking that Titan to do will change a little bit. So if I have 5 Reavers, that's going to be very different than if I have 2 Reavers and 2 Warhounds that are doing something. They're going to do different jobs, and I think that's where it's going to make the game more enjoyable for you.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Is like what role a Reaver is serving is very different if it's the heaviest Titan you have or the lightest Titan you have.
Right.
And that's a big sort of change. And so magnets are great, and they're really straightforward in this kit in a way they're not in 40K, where there's definitely if I cut along the gauntlet and then cant it down, maybe I can switch between a power axe and a power sword. Nobody got time for that.
So a part of the game I haven't gotten to play around with yet, and I am kind of toying with picking up a kit on the way home now that I'm reading this. Terrain, like from a modeling standpoint, Games Workshop has a lot of kits. They're cool. Some of them are a little harder to find. I think they stopped making a couple of the ones that are no longer available on the website. I don't think the let's talk about Games Workshop terrain and the kits is really a good conversation because they're all fucking awesome and they're great and you should just buy them. The better one was, I know, Josh, when you went to first demo a game for me, I was like, well, how much terrain do you really want? And, usually when we play 40K, we're all in. Like, we like terrain around here, right? And you were mentioning that there's actually, there's the balance really matters in this game. So, Josh, what's kind of your rule of thumb for terrain? And I'm curious, Eric, if that matches up with your experience.
Yeah, so you want to have a good amount of terrain because you want that maneuvering to matter. You want that cover to matter. So you want to have those options available to both players, both sides of the table, to create those kind of interesting situations that people are working around. You want terrain to be an interactive part of the game, not just a passively, oh, this is a line of sight blocking, yes or no. Titans also interact with terrain in interesting ways. So like the scale of terrain matters. So if you have something that, is knee height, like Titans can just walk over that. So it's cool to give options that maybe you'll get a little bit of cover, but also it doesn't necessarily negate maneuverability of Titans. But then you want huge buildings and you want some options that will be hopefully completely line of sight blocking for some Titans. So you can hide things. If you just need to be safe, you need a repair turn, whatever, like having those options built in. So I like on my tables, I like a good amount of terrain, and a good variety of terrain, height wise, density, size, etc. And it's a fun modeling opportunity that also helps, potentially tell a narrative depending on your terrain and mat and style and all that.
Yeah, so I think I'd largely agree with that. For me, a lot of AT-18's appeal is the sort of pageantry of it. And heavy terrain tables look good.
Yes.
And so that's one of the things I have factored in. I think one of the real questions, and this is a little bit sort of talk to your opponent and figure out what kind of game you want.
Right.
Is it will also depend on what you're bringing. If both of you have shown up with very warlord heavy forces, maybe you can get away with a little bit less terrain because really when it comes to it, both of you are sort of looking for a slugging match.
Yeah.
Whereas if someone has come with a fairly knight and warhound heavy force, they're relying on cover. Like a knight force in Planet Bowling Ball is dead first turn.
Right.
And so there is a degree of sort of figuring out, but similarly, you can have a dense enough terrain board where your warlord player can't move because it's just like okay, literally. And then there are rules for destructible terrain, and you need to break those out because the answer is the warlords are just going to start wrecking buildings.
Right.
Which is an amazing optional rule.
So like I like sort of a good mix of I try to have at least one building large enough to give a warlord cover, and then but probably not completely obscure it, and then a lot of terrain that's sort of in the can give cover to a warhound, light cover to a reaver, and for a warlord is just there to be there. I've played a little bit around with some things that are like dangerous terrain, but not necessarily blocking. So like, yeah, you'll have to make it through this for things like that. One of the things that I'd like to see more, and this will tie into the 3D printing thing, is more scatter terrain for folks where it doesn't matter. It's not really rules, but like your city has a park. There are little tanks around, things like that to make it, because these cities feel a little bit empty for a lot of games. So I've been working on sort of adding scatter terrain to things. I do want to say that while the GW kits are amazing and spectacular and detailed and modular and everything, if you are getting started and are like, that's really intimidating, I just need terrain, the folks who make Drop Zone Commander make cardstock urban terrain in 10 millimeter scale. It's close enough that acquiring yourself some drop zone terrain is not the worst way to just get a table going. Pretty quickly, because I will admit that the buildings are themselves like a painting project. They go together pretty easy and paint up pretty fast, but like the Drop Zone Commander people, you can exploit things, and that's nice because like there are really cool MDF kits of like skyscrapers and things like that are made for Drop Zone that you can absolutely just steal.
Yeah, and that entire cardstock building thing, I mean, they basically just unfold and You want to use glue. They say that they are self-adhesive and narrator
False.
voice. They are not. But yeah, I mean, that entire box, and given that Drop Zone Commander's support is, I don't know where it is. Drop Zone Commander's Drop Zone got shot out of orbit playing Drop Fleet Commander. You usually can find those boxes on eBay, or if a gaming store actually has it, I mean, you should be able to get those boxes for like $30 to $50 at the most. And you would have one of those boxes would absolutely do an entire table.
Yeah.
Easily. So yeah, and like you were mentioning with the terrain thing, it's almost like Warhammer Fantasy Battle, if people are familiar with that, where you do need room because your movement, you have to wheel, right? So I mean, you do have to turn and do those sorts of things. So you do need some movement and some open areas and things like that. So it doesn't just become, I'm penalized no matter what I do, and half of this game is going to be me trying to do anything. So you were mentioning, Josh, I know you have a lot of 3D printed terrain that you've done for this game. What about 3D third-party support as far as like 3D printing goes for this game?
Yeah, buildings and terrain, there are lots of options out there, varying in qualities. Kind of the staple of my tables is I've got 5 almost warlord size kind of skyscraper type buildings, which I really like to throw those out just for good variety. So you get nice maneuvering lines of fire, but also good obscuring terrain. You can't hide a warlord completely behind it, but a warlord can get some good cover off that.
Yeah.
But then I also have a lot of just small things like crates and stacks of crates that just add more flavor to the city, bring a little bit more life to it. We'll give terrain or cover to knights or warhounds or things like that, but also just make the Titans interact with it a bit more. So, like you can't end your movement walking over these crates, but if you have enough movement, you can clear the crates, which just kind of creates interesting decisions on how your models are actually interacting with that. And there's tons of options out there for the 3D printing of terrain, especially. It's really where I've dug into it.
Yeah, so we talked a bit in the sort of 3D printing episode about how I'm sort of skeptical of the whole like 3D printer goes Berts, I am gonna 3D print my whole 40K army. For Titanicus, I think there's a ton of applications for 3D printing. And one of the reasons for that is as Josh mentioned, at this scale, resin printers are okay for terrain. At 28 millimeter, resin printers are sort of a nightmare for doing terrain, but at this scale, they're really great. So there's a number of 3D printed things you can find often for Legios. You can find custom shoulder pads or custom banners or things like that. I 3D printed some stuff for Collins Force that go with that. Versatile Terrain is a company that sells their stuff, but it's 3D printed on a Form 2 printer. You can get those. Those are custom nameplates. And sort of my old rule in 40K is if it's a super heavy, it deserves a name. Everything in Titanicus is a super heavy, therefore everything deserves a name.
Absolutely.
And the nice part about that is they do have very subtle markings for the front arc on your Titans on the nameplate. And so yeah, each of my Titans is named, has a nameplate in front of it. They look great. There's a company out of the UK called Battle Bling that's designing their stuff for 3D printing. They've got alternative weapons. They're hitting the nostalgia aspect hard, so they've got some weapons that don't exist in this game yet, but are like, hey, remember that really cool thing? They've got some supplements to other kits. So, for example, I think it's the War Bringer. You could theoretically swap the weapons, but it doesn't come with 2 of the little platforms that you put the weapons on. They sell a 3D printed version of the platform. So you can just buy that, and now your weapons are swappable. The last one, and this is where a lot of my terrain comes from, is Grimdark Terrain, who's a guy who I really love 3D printing creators who have their own distinct aesthetic, but that it feels right in the setting. And so he's doing a really good job at that. He goes by Bronco Fish online, of having things that definitely feel 40K, but are not, oh, look, it's the GW kit, but in 8 millimeter. So right now I'm working on, he's got a bunch of sort of industrial airfield terrain that I'm working on. Essentially, what if Titans were fighting over an airfield with a you've got a control tower. I've got a big void shield generator, a flak bunker. I just finished printing. He came up with the Samson Heavy Lifter, which is a big boy.
Wow. That's awesome.
It's an enormous sort of like what if Thunderhawk transporter, but like 4 times the size. That just is going to sit on the landing pad, and that's cover for like that'll hide a Reaver. And so you can do things like that. I really like his terrain. He has a sort of a monthly Patreon for things like that. And again, that comes with a lot of, essentially scattered terrain. Like he has a forklift and a little fire truck and things like that that aren't going to matter for anything, but might give cover to a set of knights. And so I think there's a really diverse amount of 3D printing support for this game. This is also where I think we mentioned basing and things like that. You can find 6 and 8 millimeter little Space Marines to put on bases, to put on terrain. I've got a piece of terrain that's got a little like Space Marine command post on top of it because why not? It doesn't matter, but it adds a little bit of life to the game. So there's I think a lot of 3D printing support for this that does what I want out of my 3D printing hobby, which is to make my stuff look better and to add that little personal touch where it's like, yeah, but I've got a custom shoulder pad and that's cool. And so that's really where I think there's a lot of potential for 3D printing at this particular scale.
Yeah, I was trolling around looking at some of the 3D terrain stuff, and usually like 3D printed terrain and me are not friends. I really struggle to get excited about it or do any of those things. But yeah, there's some really good stuff that's out there because the scale itself, the terrain is small enough that they can actually build the stuff a little more solid. So it isn't just cheap, flimsy, falling apart shit that you just don't want to put paint on. That's pretty hard to get behind. Before we go into the getting started part, I just feel like this is the obligatory favorite kit moment. Since we're talking about the models, Eric, this is your game and your show. So I'll let you go. I'll let our guests go, and then I'll go in case you both choose my choices. Favorite kit. I mean, let's go with the Titans, obviously, but what is your favorite kit for this game and why?
So I sort of previewed mine. It's the Warhound. Mm-hmm. For me, I love that the kit comes with basically all the options. There's now a couple add-on options from Forge World, but like it comes with all the option. It comes with a pair of them. It is an immensely posable kit. Yeah. And I think it is a kit that looks, if you glue it in the default positions, like if you just follow the instructions, it still looks dynamic. Mm-hmm. And I really like that. You have a lot of Titans sort of stand up. Warhounds don't. And I think that kit is particularly, I think the word I'm sort of gravitating towards here is expressive. Mm-hmm. You can get a lot of mood out of how you pose a Warhound. Like where a Warhound is looking is a significant thing. And so I really like that kit. And also it is the one that is sort of in my mind the good balance of sort of detail and not so much trim that my brain starts hurting with the trim. Like with some of the bigger Titans, there's just enough armor plates that there is and now you're painting gold, steel, or brass trim for a long time.
For days.
Yes. With the Warhound, you can sort of hammer that out in a session. Yeah. And so I really like that sort of combination. It's sort of my happy medium of you can go a little bit detailed, you can do some expressive stuff, you've got room to work on a transfer or two, but you're not so far down the line that like, no, seriously, like it's going to be weeks before you finish the trim on this kit.
Josh, how about you?
For me, I'd probably go with the Reaver. Just the versatility of how you can pose the Reaver. It's got a wide variety of armor plate options, whether you got like the flat shoulder plates or the curved kind of like knee plates, things like that. So you got a lot of options to play with how you pose it, but also how you paint it. There's a lot of opportunity. There is a lot of trim on that compared to a Warhound, but not nearly as much compared to a Warmaster or a Warlord. You got tons of weapon options. It kind of naturally works its way for magnets. It naturally magnetizes that model, which is fun and easy to do. It's an enjoyable experience, making everything slot in there. Even finding a way, like I magnetize my melee weapon, so chain fist, power fist, and just finding ways to make that completely compatible from the wrist joint, the kind of elbow joint, and the shoulder joint, so that I can still make that a shooty arm option if I want to do that, which is a fun experience of kind of doing a little creative problem solving on the fly.
Yeah.
There's kind of a fine point in posing of all the Titans, of depending on the bigger Titans, that is Reaver Plus, of how the armor plates in the ankles specifically interact with the feet. And at some point there is a range of motion limit where you can't go that far unless you start kind of trimming some armor plates back. But you can get a lot of just cool personality, dynamicism out of that. There's lots of head options because there's the two different Reaver kits. You got a lot of options in there.
Man, I hate to say it. Josh, you took my number one choice. And Eric, you took my number two choice. So I'm going to go, and the only third Titan kit that I've put together is the Nemesis Warbringer, which is I'm not going to take as my favorite kit. I don't have a problem with the model. The head, the visor looks too much like, every time I see it, I just say, oh yeah, like, Randy Macho Man Savage, or Randy Macho Man. I can't talk. I can't English. You know what I'm talking about. It looks like the pro wrestler shades of Macho Man Randy Savage. There we go. That's the order of operations. So I'm going to go with one that I can't wait to do, even though I know it just won't see the table. And you know goddamn well where I'm going with this one.
I know what it is.
I fucking love the Iconoclast. I mean, I can look at it and I'm like, I don't have the experience to say this with 100% certainty, but I've played enough games to know that there's some shit that just doesn't work. And I don't care, because I want to fucking make that work. And I just have the feeling that if I buy one of those and paint it, I play with people that are going to find a way to make that a fun game and will make that thing work. And just a chain fist the size of a fucking building there's just nothing about that is wrong and that doesn't speak to my heart. So I get where a Warmaster, or the shooty version of it, the Warmaster version, correct? Is that the shooty? Yep. I get where the shooty one is going to get more table use and more play and this, that, and the other. And I don't care. I will paint an Iconoclast well before I paint a Warmaster, unless that just isn't what Sky has in stock at Herrick Games and I need a Titan that day.
You are contractually obligated to own one.
Yes.
Yeah, pretty much.
And I know obligation painting tends to kill my will to live, but I don't give a fuck. This is one that I want. So
yeah, I don't feel like a skyscraper-sized chainsword is obligation painting if you're Brian Harvey.
No.
And I think that's really the thing. The Iconoclast looks great.
Yep.
Oh my god.
It's definitely like, it's a centerpiece Titan model, and you're only gonna have one. It's not gonna show up in every game, but it looks great.
It's such a durable unit, though. It's a slow delivery system, but it is going to pay off enough times for what it's bringing to the table, and it's going to be so fun and rewarding when it happens for both players that it'll absolutely be a viable option, I think.
Yeah, it is one of those things that we talk about this for Warlords, and it's just still true for the Iconoclast, which is that, they're hard to really get in and stuff, but they are also just this area denial weapon.
Yeah.
This bubble of charge range around them that goes, look, anything that steps in here is going to die.
Yeah.
You should know that. and that's cool. And it is like, while that is fieldable by both forces, that is one of the Titans that just screams,
yes, I
am not a good guy.
Right. Yeah. And the game or two where you get to just core something.
Oh yeah,
right,
when it works, it's just going to be so much fun.
Yep. Yeah. All right. Well, so the models are sexy as shit. A person wants to get into this. Let's go into our final our final bit here. So this game, I know people are laughing looking at my comment here. I'm going to say it as a newer player. You guys have been there since ground zero of the game, all 4 years ago or whatever. But you know what I mean? Like you guys have seen the evolution of things and how they've introduced it. The thing that kept me from getting into Necromunda was that I was like, where in the fuck are the rules? I don't get where things are at. And there isn't like a definitive guide like, you should buy this. And there was like, there's a starter box, but those rules don't work anymore. And then you're like, you are encouraging me to go to like PDFs that people have stolen or whatever the deal is. This game isn't as bad. The one thing that I will ding it for is I don't like the terminal thing. I love the terminals as a game mechanic thing, but having to buy, if I want to add 2 Reavers and I'm not just buying the starter box, the terminal packs that they sell have one has the Knights ones has what? It's a Warlord, a Warbringer, which the Warbringer kit comes with its own terminal, so I'm not sure what it's doing in there, and a Reaver and 2 Warhounds. So it's basically like the old like precept maniple box, right? And the thing is, if I want to add 2 Reavers to my list, I have to go and buy 2 of those terminal packs for 1 each of those. I mean, I guess I can print the thing out and do whatever, but that part of it seems a little bit janky. The rest of stuff for getting into the game, like the starter box, is a stupidly good one. So either one of you that want to take that, now that I've got my little whine and bitch out of the way, because obviously I'm looking to buy Reavers right now. So
I'll split a terminal box with you because I need 3 more and you need 2. So done. And I think a lot like the card packs, you get like 5 of every weapon option in the card packs, which is probably overkill unless you're collecting multiple Legios worth of stuff. But it's definitely like a play group can split a card pack, and that'll probably cover everybody's needs. And that's likely true of the additional terminal things too.
Yeah, was I misreading that? Because I thought it was 1 Warlord, 1 Warbringer, 1 Reaver, 2 Warhound ones.
So there are also terminal packs. There's one that only has Warhound packs in it. It's got like 5 or 6 Warhound terminals in that pack, and there's one for Reavers also that's only Reavers. There's like 5.
Oh, I missed that. Oh, okay. I thought I misread that then. I thought there was only the 1 pack on their site.
It is definitely a thing though. I sincerely wish all of the kits just came with the terminal for the kit.
Yeah.
You bought 2 Warhounds. Here's the 2 Warhound terminals you need for the 2 Warhounds.
Yeah.
The same thing is sort of true for the weapon cards. I feel like the terminals were a little bit. GW really liked this mechanic, and then it occurred to them that they have to keep print material in stock, and GW has never liked keeping print material in stock. That is sort of one of the few universal constants of GW is if it's printed, you should probably buy it now.
Yeah.
And that does mean there's some things that are gone. So for a while there was a Legendary Titans thing, and those are gone, and now they eBay for staggering amounts of money. I think they have done a really good job up until a little bit ago. There was definitely a like, okay, what rule books do I need? And it's like, well, what are you thinking about playing? Right now, unless the answer is Knights, it's pretty clear. Buy the main rule book, and then they have consolidated the other rule books into a Loyalist and a Traitor book. The Loyalist book has a little bit more general purpose stuff, but is all the updated Legio rules, there's some new equipment to just make things cooler, etc., etc. That's the Loyalist book. The Traitor one is the Traitor book. It's got all the updated Legio rules for the Traitors. It's got the Corrupted Titan rules. And so really, the answer is buy the rule book, your faction, and if you really feel like it, the other faction. And you're pretty much set. All the campaign books and things like that are, do you want the campaign system? Do you want all the rules for the various knights? Do you want the lore? A lot of the lore is really cool. It touches on parts of the heresy that we don't get to hear about, where there's some definite Titan on Titan shenanigans, but they're not necessary. So really, it's at this point sort of the core rule book, the terminals that accompany your force, and your faction's rules.
Do you know offhand, Eric, if the Loyalist and Traitor books have all the updated maniples in them?
They do.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
That's I've only played a couple games since I picked up my Traitor book, so I haven't gone full bore into that one. I was just curious because I would say that was one of the harder barriers to entry with the kind of continual release cycle is each book released some new Legios, but also new mana pools available.
Yeah, had sort of just enough rules that everybody wanted to buy it.
Right. Yeah.
And I will say the nice part about the mana pool rules is of all the things you can look up on a wiki, the mana pool rules are the easiest to look up because they tend to be, take 2 of these, 1 of these, and optionally 1 of these, and you get thing.
Yep.
So yeah, that's sort of the barrier entry at this point. I think the starter set now comes with all the tokens and other assorted little gribbly bits you need for things to keep track of, terminal things and things like that. The starter set is, I think, one of the best starter sets GW makes.
Yes.
Everyone, when like the advice for I'm starting a new Legio, what should I buy? Is like, pick up a starter set.
Yeah.
Like, unless you're playing the Ember Wolves, you're probably going to use everything in the starter set eventually.
Yeah.
I'm interested in getting in the game. What should you buy? 1 starter set to try out. If you really like it, you could probably get away with buying another starter set. Like, it is incredibly good. It comes with a softback rulebook. It comes with various tokens and things like that because you will need special dice.
Yeah.
There are D10s and special dice with reactor markings and hit locations and things like that. Starter set comes with
Scatter
those.
dice.
Scatter dice.
Yeah.
Scatter dice are back. My precious babies. You have templates for those of you who don't have 15 3 and 5 inch templates. Those are there. So yeah, I think the starter set is, if you're interested in picking up this game, just the obvious one to choose. When I had Colin paint my opposing trader force for demo games, it was just like, Colin, just take the starter set and paint it for me.
Yeah.
Because what that is also, if someone's like, man, I really like this game, it's like, hey, the starter set is what you just played. There's no new nuance to it. You get 2 knights in it, which is enough to get sort of a flavor for, do I like playing knights? Because honestly, Knight Lancers are incredibly straightforward. They're front towards the enemy and stick them with the pointy end. So I think that's really where I'd start is the starter set, which gives you the main rule book, your faction rule book, and I think you're good to go.
All the dice, templates, tokens, etc. required. Yeah. It's a great value and a great place to start.
Yeah. I'm looking at, as soon as I feel like I keep plugging Herrick Games, but it's, what Sky has in his store. Also, when I have time to get out, what's on his shelf really dictates what I'm going to paint next. And he has a lot of stuff on his shelf. So my spontaneity is fueled by his having things in stock. But when he gets another starter set in, he hasn't had them in a while. I plan on getting it and then just giving the rule book and all the command assets and all that stuff to, hey kids, first one's free, to somebody else. That I already gave the rule book that Colin had sent to me just out of the blue to try to bait me into the game. I gave that to one of our local players, Craig, who really wants to get into it and look at it. And I'm all, hey, first one's free. But yeah, that starter box is stupidly good. Because also, too, like where you can go, we'll get into this when we get into mana pools and the way that you build lists and everything, but it's the command cards, the weapon cards have the points values on them. So if you're looking at where the lists are at, they come with all of the command terminals that you need for it. So yeah, it is a stupidly good box, and you can just go in a lot of directions that are all good based on it. So, Eric, you mentioned in the notes, and you touched on this earlier, is that the original set was not just from a standpoint, it was also what was in it. The Grandmaster edition of this game was really kind of a weird way to get going. Yeah.
Yeah, it was 2 Warlords, and that was before Warlords had any options. So it was 2 identical double Bellicosa Volcano and Apocalypse Missile Launcher Warlords, and 2 Knights? 3 Knights?
6 Questoris Knights.
Yeah, 6 Questoris Knights. I think it was envisioned as actually a 2-player starter set.
Yeah.
Where each of you has a Warlord and some Knights. It is a weird kit. And I think very early in the game you had some very distorted sort of gameplay that came from everybody has a warlord, and they're all dedicated heavy hitter warlords. There's nobody who's trying to play the midfield. Both warlords, mainly because all of those weapons are also really long range. So what you essentially did is you set up your warlords in opposing corners and just sort of shot back and forth in an artillery duel. Yeah. So the Grandmaster set is not great as a starter set. Ironically, now it's not bad because there's so much more available.
Yeah.
That you can make some cool things out of like that set plus another box. But it was a rough way to start the game.
I picked up the Titan Battle Group box, which doesn't exist anymore, but that came with a Warlord, a Reaver, 2 Warhounds, and that was a great starter box. This is obviously before the new starter kit. This was released alongside or shortly thereafter of the Grandmaster box, but I ended up picking up a Grandmaster box as a supplemental box because I was like, I could use some Knights. I could use a second Warlord. I ended up selling off the third Warlord because it came with 2 in the Grandmaster kit, but it also came with all that terrain. So it was a good deal because of that. Yeah. And then I had already purchased the rule set separately, so I ended up selling that off too, or gave it to somebody just to get them hooked and spread the love of the game. But yeah, ironically, to Eric's point, like that box would be more useful now because of the starter set that does exist than having that come out as the first kind of box set to release the game and introduce the game. There was, a lot of those kits hadn't been put out there yet. Like the Reaver kit didn't exist quite yet. The Warhound kit wasn't out there. The Nemesis Warlords or War Masters, etc. Like the first kit that came out was the Warlord kit, but not necessarily the true representation of the game, especially as Eric was describing there with just the heavy hitters lobbing shots back and forth. You don't really need to play the maneuver game the same way. The terrain that came in the box is better suited for medium scale Titans versus the big boys. So it wasn't the most interesting experience in the box, but still a good deal, even though it was really expensive.
Yeah, we're like Reavers in the current one. Reavers are... I just can't get enough of Reavers. I mean, honestly, they're just that great middle ground where it's like they've got enough that you can push the reactors a little, but not so much that you can just do dumb things, and you have to think about when you maneuver them, but not as hard. And, they're just a Reaver set first probably would have made the most sense with that game. And hey, they're selling the current best version of the starter. So that's nothing but a good thing for all of us. So we'll go into Maniples in a second, just as a shout out for resources. I know for me getting into the thing, Goonhammer has been phenomenal. Just as far as any question that I've had, I have just been able to just go there and find an answer for it and a full-length article on it, pretty much. I mean, they've been hitting that hard from day one. And then also, you guys put in here the AT18 Facebook group, which, by the way, one of their questions when you go to join, to make sure, like one of your agreements, it's like, do you understand that 5mm by 1mm magnets can magnetize these things? Don't fucking post that question because it's the...
that is the perennial question on that.
The early days of that group was, you were causing some flame wars when everybody's first question, when like, I just joined the group, what size magnets do I need? And literally every person had joined the group was just asking that same question. So it's funny that they made that one of the required answers now.
So I'm pretty sure Eric's on my team on this one. I know Colin, I don't know if Colin's on my team on this one for that, but he might have just been nice because I sent him some. You have used my digital calipers. Am I right in saying this is the way?
Digital calipers are great.
We're fucking grown men. Buy some digital calipers. Go to Ace. Buy some pay $30 for them. You will not regret your life choice. Anyways, Maniples. This is how you build your force, right? So, Eric, how do we go into this in a responsible way?
That's a good question. So sort of thinking about Maniples, they're a hybrid of sort of the old force organization charts and formations. So they have two sort of known things. There's the required elements. This is what makes your mana pool. There are optional elements, which are, okay, these are the things you can add on. So think about this as your, HQ and 2 troops, and then you can take a whole bunch more.
Right.
Then you can add essentially reinforcements and night banners are things that come along with this. But the core is the required elements and the optional elements. And for that, you get something. Your Titans essentially get a rule that comes from that. That can be, you can re-roll tests to do things. That can be, I don't remember what mana pool it is, but it's one where if the Warhounds bring down a shield on something, other things can fire at it. Mm-hmm. There's these special rules, and that's where it kind of gets into this formation thing. And this is where I think, again, sort of Goonhammer has done a really good job. They had for a while, their Warlord Wednesdays articles were called Maniples and You, and this was just an article on maniples. And like, today we're going to talk about this maniple, what it does, go from there. And so that's a really good source to look at this. But yeah, maniples are sort of the core of how you think about building your force. And you can, for larger games, you can have multiple maniples, but like, it's basically the framework upon which you build a force.
And maniples are always a maximum of five Titans. Yep. I think they all require 3, and then there's 2 additional options of additional Titans you can add to that maniple that will benefit from that maniple rule. There's no limit to the number of Titans you can bring to a game, which are the reinforcement Titans. So if you want to bring Titans of a different flavor or above and beyond that kind of limit of 5 that the maniple offers, you've got options. So you can always bring kind of whatever you want. It's just how you want to build that and what kind of special rule it unlocks.
So conspicuously right now, for example, the Iconoclast I don't think is in any maniples. So that is always a reinforcement Titan. So you're taking your maniple of whatever plus an Iconoclast. I think
the same is true for the War Master.
Yeah, the War Master, I think the Ordo Sinister Warlord is like that too. It's just always... They're not, and like if you read Mortis, they're not part of your organization. They're not following your orders. They have shown up to the same battle on probably the same side, right. And that's as far as that goes.
Yeah, I think so we were mentioning earlier that there are some Legios that their rules will allow you to swap things in or out, and isn't it, is it Krytos, the Godbreakers? The ones that are in that just sexy, like Sons of Horus, Seafoam Green, white. I believe there's one maniple where they can sub out one of the things for a Warbringer, correct? Or I
think they get bonus Warlord.
Okay. I thought there was one where they could bring a War Master in a thing, but
I'm blanking on which Legio it is, but there is a Legio that lets you drop a Reaver for a Warlord.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that might have been theirs. I might just be mixing those two things up. So, yeah. So the beauty of the thing, and again, if you go to Goonhammer, they have isn't it called like their Maniple Raider or something like that? There's a thing where you can type in which Titans you have, and it will, as you add Titans to it, it will start eliminating choices of all the different maniples that you can possibly use, and it'll show you like different combinations, the different ones that you can use, and what your collection of Titans that you want to bring will fit into. And so you can that's kind of the fun of it, is that you can, if you want to, you can look at a particular, like Josh, I know you just bought a bunch of Reavers for the Corsair one, right? So you can feel that, but you can, and I did recently also with the one with the 2 Warbringers and 3 Reavers, like that.
So Ruptura.
Yeah. I'm going to order another Reaver just so I can field that one with the 2, Nemesis Warbringers that I bought for that. You can go in that direction, or you can just look at what do I have and what do I paint, and then look at what maniples work with that collection.
I haven't seen that, but that's awesome. That's a great resource.
Yeah, it's really cool. So for a beginner, I think it's important to we don't have to go through all the different ones, right? But the starter box that has the two Warhounds, 2 Reavers, it isn't just that those are good, easy to learn, they actually use the rules of the game. Like that starter box is a great jumping off point, because the number of maniples that you have that can work off of that, where it's like, just take those plus a Reaver, or just take those plus a box of Warhounds, or starter box plus Warhound or Warlord Titan. I mean, it's staggering the number of directions you can go in that, and it's glorious. Who put the quote from Goonhammer in here in the notes? Because it's so true.
I did, yeah. So that was your previous note too. Was like, oh, maybe let's make a starting list based upon what's in the box there, which is there's essentially 4 options of mana pools that use those exact same models as your starting base. So your lists are going to be very similar, minus basically one special rule of what those different mana pools are bringing, which does change the way the game plays, though, which is cool.
Yeah,
and I think the important thing is your choices for units will be the same. How you equip those units, won't be the same. So, for example, I mentioned the mana pool I couldn't remember at the time. It's the Venator mana pool. If you strip the shields of a Titan with your Warhounds, you get a free shot with your Reaver.
Yeah.
So what you're looking for there is your Warhounds. You want lots of essentially DACA weapons. You want lots of Vulcan Mega Blasters to bring down shields. But then you want your Reaver to have at least one pretty heavy, pretty flexible gun. Versus the Ferox mana pool, which is another one. There you're getting lots of pluses to armor rolls if you're close in. So there you're talking about, like, maybe I take a Reaver Chain Fist and a Melta Cannon, because like a Melta Cannon with +1 to armor rolls is just like, oh, nice Titan you have there, shame if something happened to it. So there is some differences there, even though you have those same sort of things. Since we've joked about how good a deal it is now, hilariously, one of my favorite, and this is actually how I sort of started thinking about Titanicus, because it was building off the Grandmaster set, is if you can find the Grandmaster set and then pick up a thing of Warhounds, you have a Regia mana pool, which is just 2 Warlords and 2 Warhounds, all grouped together, sharing shields, meandering up the field, killing things. It's great. I love it. And it's a very different use of Warhounds. There the Warhounds are these sort of supplemental outriders, but they're staying close to the Warlords rather than how you usually see Warhounds and Warlords, which is the Warhounds are way up front and then the Warlords are sort of trundling behind them.
Yeah.
But one of the things is the starter box, and Goonhammer does touch on this, gives you a lot of flexibility. And I think GW knows this. There are a ton of mana pools that start with, a Reaver and 2 Warhounds.
Yeah.
And like, what special rules do you want with those? So there's a lot of flexibility there.
Yeah, and just to add another layer, we didn't talk a lot about stratagems, and that's one of the refreshing things with this game is that you have. It's not like you're getting command points that you use every turn that turns into 50 million rerolls. Like, as you mentioned, Josh, rerolls are really hard to get in this game, which is really fucking refreshing. Because one thing about 40K for the last 2 editions has been, yo, dog, I heard you like rerolls.
Hitting on 2s, rerolling 1s.
Yeah, it's a bit it's a bit much, but so it's kind of nice because you can also add these stratagems can also add on top of that thing, and you don't know which ones your opponent has taken as well for certain things. So there could be a thing where, if you look at like Furians, they have one that's pretty expensive, but it's a pretty big Alpha Strike one, Offensive Surge, where it's like 3 command points for it, but all of the ones in a particular mana pool get to shoot 1 weapon twice, which is a pretty big deal. So if you're taking something like the, oh damn it, you just gave me the name of it. Is it the Arcus Battle Line? Is that the 2 Warbringers and 3 Reavers?
It's the Ruptura.
Oh, Ruptura, right. So if you're doing that one, it's like, you might, if you have ones that are just running around that are also equipped for, melee just happened. If they're using like Vulcan Mega Bolters and things like that, like you can really make sure that, that one turn, if you're using those, you can use them to really strip the shit out of shields. And then when the 2 Nemesis Warbringers go to, fire their big guns, then I don't know. But that's also a thing that you could try to position yourself and try to make happen. And then with the alternating activations, your opponent knows exactly what the fuck you're going to try to do. And it just adds.
It's going to make you try to split those shots between multiple different Titans instead of getting to just boil into one.
Right.
And the nice part about the stratagems is the number of points that you get for that is not 6 or 12. It's, 2 or 3.
Yeah.
And so you're looking at, I've got one big play
Yeah.
or a couple sort of smaller annoyance things.
Yeah.
There's not sort of every turn you're like, but wait. There's sort of, you sort of get that one moment of that big thing, or there's one called Vox Blackout, which sort of messes with your opponent's ability to do commands.
Yeah.
So that's a big one. If you're like, I'm about to get charged by like 4 Titans, I need to make this harder.
Yeah.
You can start doing things like that. There's thermal mines, which will do sort of light damage to the legs of Titans. So if you're trying to slow down, say hypothetically a very Warhound heavy Trader Titan list, you might play that one to sort of slow down some fairly vulnerable Titans, because if Warhounds can't move, what is the point of a Warhound? And so there's some elements there. And one of the fun parts about this is if you omit certain rules, you get more stratagems. So if you don't play with Legio rules, you get an extra stratagem point to just sort of make up for that. There's a lot of things like that where it's easy to sort of give them out for things. If you're playing in an event and you want who won the first phase to get something, okay, give them an extra stratagem point, and you do cool things. There's one that's an aerial bombardment that if you don't paint a marauder bomber for, you're a coward. These things are all sort of things you can add, and they're little things. They can have a big impact on the game, but they're not nearly as sort of voluminous. You're not scrolling through pages of these going, oh my god, which ones do I use? You probably have a plan for what you want to bring, and it's only 1 or 2.
They're also used as a point balancing mechanic too. So if you're applying a disparity of points in the game, there's a chart in there that's like, if you're in a different bracket of points, then your opponent gets a couple extra strategy points. Which it's just a fun, simple way to balance it. And like you were saying, they're not overkill. There's not pages and pages of them or anything like that. And you probably kind of know what makes sense already just by taking a quick look at them.
So
and it is a nice balance. If like Brian wants to bring his Iconoclast and I don't have something nearly that many points, it's like, okay, so I get a Warlord and an extra stratagem point.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So instead of, I put in here for us to put in our favorite maniple and call it a day on this. I don't think we even need to do that. It's just because I don't want to break down like this is what it does and all those things. I mean, just to kind of give an example, Josh, what are you painting towards right now?
I'm painting towards the Corsair maniple because I really like Reavers. I just picked up 3 more to go with the 2 that I've had going for a couple of years, just so I could round that out. And the Corsair maniple has some pretty cool rules that just make it fun and flexible.
Mm-hmm. And that one, if you're a beginner, it's because that one goes 3 to 5 Reavers. Is that correct?
3 required, 2 more optional. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're playing smaller games, you can just add single Reaver to your starter box, right? And take off from there. And the Reaver is just a great all-around Titan for starting out because it does a little bit of everything, but it isn't so many eggs in one basket that you're kind of stuck,
And that's also a solid maniple as you're learning the game and learning the positional requirements and things like that, because it penalizes you a little bit less for, I screwed up the movement phase and now I'm dead. It lets you get out of jail free for some of those movement mistakes early on, where you're still thinking about it and you're still using that, but you get to sort of, it's a little bit of a working with a net as far as learning the movement mechanics of the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's almost kind of like the what is the general all-purpose one? Is it the Axiom?
Yep.
Maniple.
Yep.
So it's one where
one of everything.
Yeah, it's what, 2 Reavers or a Reaver, Warlord, 2 Warhounds with a couple.
Required, I believe, is Warlord, Reaver, Warhound, and then it's an optional Warhound and Reaver. I could be mistaken on that, but it's basically one of everything of kind of your base level Titans.
Yeah.
And that special abilities, it lets you reroll, or no, if you fail orders, normally orders are just done, so you can't issue any more orders to the maniple, where that one still lets you to continue issuing orders to the Titans that have not yet failed orders. So.
And again, that's starter box plus Warlord.
Plus a Warlord.
Right?
Yeah.
Which is a Titan you probably want to get next anyways.
And there's literally no army that is upset that it gets to try to fix orders that it failed. Like,
Right.
That'll always be good.
I'm painting towards the Ruptura one that you were talking about. When you told me about that in the store, I was like, because there was a Warbringer, there were 2 Nemesis Warbringers there, and I was like, no, I don't want to get one. I don't. And you're like, well, there's one where you can take.
I think it's my favorite for the exact reason that you're building it.
Oh my god, yeah, you were like, you could take those. You can, if you had 2 of those, you can just add 1 more Reaver to the 2 you own already. And that's a thing. And you were explaining how the rules for it work too. And I was just like, oh god damn it. And you're like, yeah, you could do a double chain fist, right? The Brian Harvey pattern Reaver. Yep. And I was just like, oh shit.
You get free boosted movement every turn for one of your Reavers, and then if the other dudes kill things, you get extra movement. And
right.
It's like, just get that guy into combat and let him go full butcher mode.
And yeah, you explained to me what that was. I was like, oh god, I didn't read that. And I turned around and bought both of them. I was like, they're coming home with me.
We'll do a rare match of that someday, and it'll be fantastic.
Oh my god. Any favorites of yours, Eric, to kind of wrap out Maniples?
So I've mentioned it, but it is also what I'm painting towards. I'm working on getting the Warlords for Regia Maniple. Because as Storm's thing is, it moves slightly faster the first couple turns. So having 2 Warlords isn't as big a deal in terms of sort of slow movement. You get to merge all the shields. And the other nice part about a Storm is you get some rerolls to repair rolls to bring those shields back up.
Yeah.
And so I just like this idea of this sort of cluster of 2 Warlords and 2 Warhounds sort of advancing in a stately and leisure-like fashion up the field, utterly not caring that you're pounding away at their shields.
Yeah.
And just sort of hitting back as it goes. I think you get some sort of unique attendant sort of roles for the Warhounds. And I just like the idea of this like king, queen, and courtiers concept as how you build this maniple. And I think it'll look cool because Warlords look cool.
Yeah. Any final things you guys would throw out here for Titanicus? Like, I mean, I think we've really kind of covered the appeal of it, the beautiful models, great gameplay, balance of crunch and fun, nice static system that is supported. I mean, anything else to add to that before we close this out?
Got one little kind of total aside from anything we've covered now so far is that Aeronautica Imperialis is the exact same scale. It's 8mm scale also. So those planes, while they don't have rules that cross over, there's a ton of options for narrative play of getting some kind of interaction, writing a scenario, custom rules with, Thunderhawks dropping in, doing a bombing run, somebody needing to get extracted, things like that. So there's just really cool modeling and narrative opportunities of combining these 2 games. And I'm sure Epic at some point, whenever that gets revisited, will do that, naturally. But the models are great. And AT is such a great game. There's no reason kind of not to find your own way of combining the 2, I think.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of fun little modeling options with, an Arvis lander parked on the top of a building as just adding that little extra bit of thing. I had mentioned I'm building an airfield campaign. All of the landing strips have, a lightning or a thunderbolt sitting on them because why not? It looks cool. I think that's a good... Those 2 games, I think there's a lot of potential for, as you said, sort of linked games and things like that. And like, realistically, one is not Heresy era, but like the Imperial Navy and the Space Marines are there. So, ta-da, it's Heresy era.
Yeah.
Paint them in Legion colors and away you go. So I think those games do work really nicely together. I think we've sort of alluded to this, but odds are if there's anyone in your area who plays Titanicus, they are desperately interested in getting other people to play Titanicus.
Yeah.
Ask them for a demo game, and they will probably be over the moon. And they will happily do that. And like one of the things with the starter set is I have played Reaver and Warhound versus Reaver and Warhound, and that's a fun game.
Yeah.
It's it's not a particularly long game, and it tends to spectacularly end with 2 Warhounds and a Reaver dead and 1 Reaver sort of limping off the field. But if you just want to get a feeling, that's an incredibly good way to just get a feeling for the game. And I think there's a very strong community of players who would love to see more people play Titanicus.
Yep. On that note, I think most people who are in this game are in pretty deep and either have multiple Legios or they have one huge Legio with enough models to offer a full kind of smorgasbord of options for both sides. Like I've got 2, if not 4 to 5 of every model that's been put out so far, minus a War Master. I only have one of those. But like I could easily field a 1,500 points per player, full scale game, maybe even 1,750, with just what I have in my collection. So if you want a full game and you're not on, you haven't invested yet, you want to try it, you've played your first kind of starter box game, but you want to see what is the full scale game. I think a lot of players are kind of in a similar boat that I am, that just have a ton of models that they already own and you field 2 full armies out of it.
Yeah, there's not a lot of Titanicus dabblers out there. Titanicus players tend to go hard.
So I think the one thing that I would add is that, aside from being a great game and, they're new models to me, and so it's a whole new range to paint and blah, 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 blah. I think it's the nature of the gameplay and the modeling part of it. All these things are things that really appeal to me, but they also, the people that appeals to are the people that I tend to want to play. And so for me, this game, I think, is the thing. I mean, this year, just because with planning and whatnot and trying to, make sure I make it through the school year without, catching COVID and having to miss class. Because if you're not a teacher, you don't realize this. Not teaching your class is actually harder than teaching your class, right? So I don't want to have a sub for my classes and I'm trying to just skate through. But it's like, when I feel that it's fine to go to conventions and I have enough timing and things like that, this is the game that I can see myself playing, because you care about your models. You don't need to bring a ton of them. And this is the kind of game that if I'm going to play it with a stranger, I think I have a better chance of, it's almost like Blood Bowl, where you're like, I don't know that I've played a game of Blood Bowl where I'm like, this person is a doorknob and I want the last 2 hours of my life back. Like, I just get the sense it reminds me of Blood Bowl in that way. And I just feel like this is a game that if you were to go to a convention and find those other people that have that pent up, I love this fucking game, and so do you, we're best friends now, I feel like you're just going to have a lot of that energy when you go to it. So that's kind of like the weird background radiation motivation for me with this game.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very rare for you to encounter the primer gray counts as a color.
Yes.
There's no competitive meta to chase. So there's not a lot of that. Nobody's doing this for ITC points. There is no Adeptus Titanicus ITC. And it is, a lot of people are doing this for the narrative. Why are you playing this army? Because did you read about the, Ember Wolves? They're
right.
Awesome.
Right.
Like, Fire the Ursus Claws.
Yeah.
Like, that ties into something too. Like, this is one game that I have absolutely no investment in the outcome as far as winning or losing. Like, I'm just going to have a great time. Something naturally is going to unfold story-wise, cinematically. Like, there's just so many cool moments that are going to happen that winning or losing is like the back of my mind. Like, obviously you can play with the mission and all that and you're more likely to win, but you're going to have a great time even if you get decimated.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've never worried about the outcome of a game.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that we finally got this episode done. Not because I wasn't looking forward to it, because I have been looking forward to it. And man, our schedules have just not lined up at all. And it's finally done. Adepticon is next week from when we're recording this. So I'm hoping they will announce some cool stuff for this game, or cool stuff adjacent to this game. If like you were saying, the Epic might be a thing. Yeah, Josh, thanks for coming on and doing this. And also thank you for just kind of guiding me through the game, and just knowing that you just had to wait me out, that I was going to get into this game. And I think it's funny that us playing Battlefleet Gothic is here and there was kind of what got me having the itch for that whole resource management thing. And then, oh God, if Battlefleet Gothic had reactors in it, I'm done. I'm just done.
Just wait.
Oh man, if they announce that at Adepticon, I am my wallet is fucked.
And I mean, I think that is sort of the beauty of this game, is it is that, can you hit all the nostalgia notes and still have modern game design?
Right.
And I want to see that for other games. I want to see that for Epic. I want to see that for Battlefleet Gothic. I want to see what modern game design, modern miniatures design.
Yes.
But that, can I nail the tone that you used to be looking for?
Yep.
Take
I'm just
all
looking forward
that,
to
but in space.
Yeah. So yeah, go out, get the starter box, play some games, order stuff from, I keep mentioning Sky's, my local store. Order stuff from Sky at herrickgames.com. You can't go wrong with this game. It's beautiful. Before we go into what our next episode is about, I forgot to mention this at the beginning. I'm going to do it at the end here. So a big thanks to Colin and Legalized Mischief Productions, if you want to check out his stuff. Colin and the other guys in the Discord channel that apparently Colin decided to, I think he thought I was gloating a little too much about my Death Guard almost being done. And it was right around, I'd like to think it's my birthday, but I'm pretty sure he was just trying to skull fuck my achievement of almost having my backlog done. You guys getting together, and I'm not going to lie, I walked into the store looking to buy Mortarion, and he wasn't on the shelf, and I was like, oh, fuck, it got sold. Damn it, I thought I'd been checking the inventory, and then Sky walked out with it and handed it to me and said, no, Colin guys got the guys together, and they just want to destroy your backlog. Here's Mortarion, and now that the Adepticon stuff's going to be out of the way this week, I have time to get back to him and start painting it. But Mortarion, Colin was jokingly calling it the Mortarion effect when I started painting my other Chaos stuff. It's just, Mortarion is a model. I've painted one for a commission, but it is a model that is made in such a way that it is perfect for my painting style, because it's, with me, I'm like, I'm going to do all of the armor in one sitting. The way that Mortarion is laid out, he is made to paint in sub-assemblies, and those sub-assemblies are about the size of my painting tolerance on a night when I'm tired. And so it is such a perfect model, and just thank you to all of you guys that chipped in on that and bought it for me. And honestly, you guys buying that is what freed me up, because I was going to buy that model that day. I was like, I'm going to buy this. I'm going to celebrate celebrate myself here and get this thing. And that's why I have 2 Warbringers. Is that
it's not like we saved you money.
You did not save me money. You cost me more money, but you tripled my joy. So
it's a good thing I was at the store that day and I told you about the beauty of the Ruptura.
Yeah, I was getting ready to just leave, and then you told me about that, and I was like, oh, fuck. All right, I'll take both of them. Let's go. So next episode, this is one I talked to Mark from the Battle Host, because he's one of those guys that I just feel like he just has a good, even-headed approach to the game and has a foot kind of in the narrative world, understands the competitive world. I originally talked to him back before they released the secondaries. I was like, hey, when they redo the secondaries, would you come on for a segment sort of explaining those? Because when I hear people complain that the game's too complicated, or they haven't played in a long time and they don't know what's going on, and if you're not an ITC player, the whole secondary thing doesn't feel as natural. I finally this week hit the tipping point and heard one too many. I just played 40K and it's too complicated, and I don't know if this game is for me anymore, bitch and moan. I heard it one too many times. It's become I spilled my Agrax Earthshade or Nuln Oil, let me put a picture on the fucking internet thing. And so I want to actually do, and not rather than be a dick about it and start doing whatever, I actually want to do an episode that is a beginner's guide for experienced players, people that haven't been playing 40K for a while. How do you get back into 9th edition? Because now we're getting outdoors a little bit. We're getting outdoors more. We're playing more. We're mingling. Probably in your opinion, Eric, probably might be spiking the football at the 15-yard line. But we're getting out. We're playing a little bit more. Just look at the new secondaries. How have the missions changed? And just kind of a beginner's guide for experienced players. Because if you haven't played in a long time, you're actually a beginner, right? Just to kind of take you through that. So as we were recording this episode, I texted Mark and to make sure that I could actually say, let's go ahead and do that. That's going to be our next episode. That's going to be episode 7. So Josh, thanks for coming on. Eric, thanks for putting up with scheduling, whatnot, and getting up early and with your
always
your post-tenure life here and craziness. And we'll see everybody next month.